All right. I think we are on YouTube, so I'm going to hit record. All right. I think we are on YouTube. As soon as somebody lands in the chat room, if they can let us know that we are live, then we will start blabbing. I don't like to start the intro until there's actually someone there to hear it, right?
Okay, now I can see that you're live. I just saw that you're live.
All right. Yes, I think you're now in the chat room. And as soon as somebody else tells us that, you can see that I'm live. So we're not there's Jana. Jana is kind of like the captain of Ship Emily when it comes to these things. So she's there. We are all good. And let's get started. All right. So this is a rare episode of Strange Mosaic Live, and I've been waiting for this one for a long time. My friend, one of my, I don't know, I hardly know her, but she's one of my favorite people. She is her YouTube channel is Project Chaney, and she's about to make a splash with a big new different type style of show. And she's also the owner of Laura's absolute favorite Instagram account, Chaney the Vampire Slayer is here to slay some vampires with me. And I'm super happy to have you back. How are you doing, my friend?
I am doing fantastic. I am looking at myself on this and realizing that my hair looks like a little hair helmet, but
well, you're definitely rocking the new
cover myself. I just don't even need to look at myself at all.
You're right. You're definitely rocking the new do. And I'm super glad to have you here. We had a great show last time you were here, and then we were supposed to do a show together with Lindsay, and life went super crazy. It was actually all the same week. I think your life took a little bit of a crazy turn, which we're going to talk about here tonight. And my mom died, and it was kind of interesting that those things happened at the same time. But since then, and since I kind of found out what had been going on with you, I was hoping to get a chance to talk with you about it, because while it's a sensitive subject, and it's something that I'm sure most people would rather just move on from if they've been through it, you're a really unique person. I think your perspective on this kind of experience could be very, very valuable, and also a teaching moment for those of us who are very judgmental of people who find themselves in such circumstance and think we know what we would do. And I don't think that that's true at all. So, I'm super happy you're still here with us, but I would love for you to just, in whatever way you want to, tell people kind of what you have lived through in the last sort of 6 or 7 months. And then we'll, as you start laying it down, I'm sure I'll have questions and commentary will go from there. And I'm sure at some point we'll get on to talking about something way more like out there and metaphysical or conspiratorial or whatever.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, it kind of all is, though, honestly. Yeah. It kind of all is like we've all been living through medical tyranny for, however long. And so it's almost like I just had a really personal experience with it. And I got to live through my own traumas a little, because I realized my biggest fear was going to the emergency room. Like that was my biggest fear, was just going to the hospital. Like I had something inside my intuition that I kind of knew that when I walked through the doors, that it was all going to be different on the other side of it. And so I put it off for longer than I should have. So anyway, way before we were supposed to meet up, I had a pain in my left side. I always tell people that it's right under where Christ is cut. So I had this pain there, right under my rib cage. And it went on for a few months, and I went to the doctor about it. And after, we all research ourselves. And so I was like, I think it's my spleen, because I started to have this sharp pain in my shoulder here. And apparently you have your liver and your spleen are like sister organs to each other. And if your liver's hurt and it gets really inflamed, you'll get a pain in this shoulder. But if your spleen's really hurt and gets inflamed, it hurts in this one, because you have these arteries that go down in your organs. This is all stuff I'm telling you guys, because you never know. You never know. It's the shoulder pain that made me know it was my spleen. And so I told the doctor I thought this, but they were like, oh, little lady, pat me on the head a little bit. Maybe it's diverticulitis. Maybe it's your ovaries. Maybe it's, and they made me do all this other stuff. And I was like, I think it's my spleen. So by the time they sent me to get the CAT scan for my spleen, the doctor's ego was already a little out of whack, that he was like, how did you know it was your spleen? Why did you think it was your spleen? And I'm like, because we're not supposed to self-diagnose.
Was this on the trip to the emergency room, or had you gone to the doctor before things got?
I went to the doctor before.
Okay.
And so,
continue.
Yeah. So I went to the doctor before. And so they did a CAT scan of my spleen, and they're like, you have a hematoma on your spleen. And I was like, I don't know if they convinced me I hurt myself. They were like, how did this happen? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I hurt myself at work. Like, it was almost like a little kid that I was just like, so then I went to some follow-up appointments, and on my last follow-up, they were like, your white blood cell count's very high, but everything looks okay. And it's probably just your spleen healing. And no one wants to think they have cancer. So if the doctor tells you you're all good, you're like, whoa, and I'm out. My life goes on. I had kept feeling pain, but I kept thinking it was going to get better. But really, my pain threshold was just getting higher and higher and higher. And I was just living in agony every day.
Yeah.
So probably around January, I felt way different, where it was like I almost didn't have enough energy to now get through my work day. And I was a sous chef, and we were turning into season. So my chef needed me there more. And I knew what my job was. I knew I needed to have to show up more, but mentally, every other thought in my brain was pain. And even when I started to cut things and prepare plates, I was starting to lean on my station a lot. Like, just the weight of myself was becoming painful. And I had told a few friends, and I'd kind of gotten a little morbid, where I was like, I think I'm dying. They were like, shut up, just go to the emergency room. Like, you're so silly. Like, this is so silly. But I really felt like I was dying. Like, something in my intuition felt like this. So I go to the emergency room finally, and they do a CAT scan of me with contrast this time. So this is what don't even let them do it. If they're going to CAT scan you ever, just make them CAT scan you with contrast, because they would have seen this all the first time if they would have called for the CAT scan with contrast, but they never did. So they did this time, because I'm like, it's my spleen. This is going on. They get me into a thing right away. And they're like, oh, your spleen's exploded into your stomach and into your pancreas and into your something else. I don't know. They're like, everywhere it touched, we got to cut out. And you're lucky you don't have sepsis right now. We have to do an emergency surgery like tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm just, all on a whole bunch of drugs, because now everybody's like, holy cow, this girl must be in so much pain. And so now I've never taken any kind of drugs like that. I'm allergic to codeine. So it's like, immediately I'm out of it. So everything's kind of like a flash through like all my surgery and the phase. And I know they told me this somewhere in the hospital. I'm in the hospital in ICU for like a week to 8 days, or a week, because I get out on February 14th. I get out on Valentine's Day. And by the way, all the nurses, I have to say, that took care of me were dope. I was so bitter against the whole entire community because of everything with, but I realized so many of them didn't back it. So many people had moved to Florida because they wouldn't take different kinds of forced stuff from their different hospitals in their different states, and getting to hear their stories, because they all looked at my chart. So they knew how I stood on everything. And all of them had to come ask me like, dang, you're a young girl. Why is this happening to you? And some of them whispered in my ear, did you take that Fauci freaky shit? Like, I don't know what words we're allowed to say here, so I'm gonna I don't want any of that stuff. But so a lot of people were really quote unquote woke to the agenda that was going on, and that was kind of validating to hear. So somewhere while I'm in the hospital, they give me all this news, but I don't really know. And so when I get out of the hospital and all the drugs start wearing off, and all the getting put under starts wearing off, all the anesthesia, I'm like, I have stage 4 lymphoma. Like, oh my gosh, I have cancer. I'm cut open all the way from my sternum to my belly button. I'm healing on my couch. And you're telling me that I got to go next week to get a port in my chest. Like, because the chemotherapy you're going to put in me is so poisonous that it will blow my veins out. And this chemo was developed as like a torture, maybe by the Nazis. And you want me to put this poison in my body because probably it's the only shot I have to live right now because I'm already missing my organs.
Okay, so let me ask you a couple. So just quickly, was there ever a moment many weeks or months earlier where you felt something like it could have been a rupture or something explosive? Like was there a moment that you either felt and didn't say anything or missed? Or is this something that just sort of ripped over time and they're calling it exploded because it looks like a mess now? But
I think it actually, I don't know if it seeped or how it happened. Like, I don't know, but I definitely remember something like being at work one night and just standing in my work life going downhill, that every hour I was there, it was kind of funny because afterward, my chef, who she's awesome. I was having to go out front and like, I thought my back, I was like, what is happening to me? Like, is this age? What's happening? Because my small of my back kept hurting, but it was all my lymph nodes swollen. So every time I'd stand and gravity started to settle, all my lymph nodes, and now I had stage 4. So it was in pretty much everywhere. And they just didn't know if it was in my bones yet. That was like they were like, we got to scan you and see if it's in your bones, but it was already through my organs.
Okay, so whatever happened with your spleen was like the rupturing of your spleen separate from the cancer? Was it the result of the cancer, the cause of the cancer, correlated, or like what were the relationships between the spleen exploding and having cancer?
I asked my doctor where I got the cancer from. And typically this type of cancer that I had, they saw it in Vietnam vets, like Agent Orange. Mm-hmm. So I was like, what? Like, so is it Monsanto? Is it Teflon? And my nurse practitioner said, I don't know. It could be chemtrails.
Okay, so we don't know for sure
but my spleen, your spleen's the organ that it pretty much is like this bomb filter. Right. And it is, so I believe my spleen kept the cancer at bay in my body for who knows how long, that it was just like the only thing. So it didn't gather everywhere else. And it wasn't in my other organs. They just, everywhere my spleen touched after it exploded, they had to cut off. So it was almost like my spleen could have been the thing. I don't know, like if it was all just in there, but I know I had it all through my lymph nodes as well. Like when I got a scan from head to toe, I had it through my lower lymph nodes, but I didn't have it through any of my higher ones. So even that is like, did everything my spleen explode? Did it just go into that? Because it was kind of instant. Like I got down to, I'm not super tall. I'm 5'8", but when I was getting out of the hospital and healing, I got down to below 120 pounds, which is crazy on me. Like I was so skinny. And right when I got my spleen out, it's almost like my body immediately started to gain weight again. It was almost like I was malnourished for however long. Like my body was just slowly deteriorating.
So there's like a couple of interesting things there. Like, first of all, like how long a person can go and learn to adapt to the pain and continue pushing themselves. Like this is something I've experienced with like injuries and all kinds of weird pains where it's like, by the time you finally give in and go to the doctor, people are like, how have you been functioning like this? It's like this weird, strange phenomenon about sort of humans. But also, you know, the fear of going to the doctor, right? Like, well, like I resonate with this very much, particularly the emergency room, but like for me, really almost any doctor since I was a kid, like the amount of discomfort I have to be in before I give in to go is high. So it sounds like, you know, you're pretty similar.
That's trauma, by the way. I've learned that I used to be very proud of my high pain threshold, but now I've learned because of all this healing that is from somewhere as a little kid, you cried and no one answered. So you had to soothe yourself and you realize like your tears or your wailing for your pain weren't going to do anything for you. So you just kind of suck it up and you go on again. Like it's almost like somewhere your parents were a coach instead of a parent. You know, like that hard idea coach. And so you're just like, suck it up. there's no crying in baseball.
Totally. Totally. Right. I love, that's one of my favorite lines from that movie, which is one of my favorite movies. Okay. So now you have no spleen and you're missing parts of your other organs, or you're missing other organs?
Parts of my other organs. They had to stop my surgery because he nicked my diaphragm. And your diaphragm, I know. And
as if it's not already enough, right?
Your diaphragm is like a tomato. So if you can't nick it, because the whole thing will just be another explosion. So they had to stop the surgery right away. So sometimes I don't even know what I should say on video, because I don't know how far this will go on after.
Right.
But sometimes I wonder if they just did something, like my spleen exploded and then I just had to go through things to get what they couldn't get out. Like I don't know how much of medicine I trust, even though I went through all of this. And because I still had to do a whole bunch of treatments after I felt like I was done. And because each time you park yourself in a medical bed or facility or whatever, that's money for them. And so they don't want to lose that money at all. And so I don't know how much your health is wavered over their financial, but I also am an organic person, and I feel like I already thought I was dead. So the chemo to me was just like, I already thought in my head, I was just doing it because of all the people that I was looking at that loved me.
Right.
At the time, I didn't care anymore. In my head, I was so weak. I didn't have anything to fight with. So it was just like, I don't care. What do you guys want me to do? Okay, I'll do it. I was just miserable. And once I started Reiki, that's when everything changed. Like I immediately knew from one day to the next that, it was like almost like Iron Man or something, like getting a new heart put back in. It was like, I'm going to live. And it was just not even a question in my head, and everything became easy and better. And it was wild.
Well, I mean, Reiki, it's obviously like an energy practice. And so the energy had kind of been stripped from you, or maybe it was down to like this tiny little nugget left. And a good practitioner can find that bit of energy and sort of grow it and move it and get it going again. So I can see that almost like, when you see a scan go up or down, like no energy, and then move the energy and the field goes up. Okay. So you're you're home, you're on the couch, you're recovering from having half your insides removed. And then they're like, now let's go start chemo. Right. Yeah. So did the chemo which was the worst part? That first experience, obviously the part before you realized what had happened, recovering from the surgery, or like now you're getting pumped full of poison, which I'm sure is like a journey all of its own, just in terms of like the strange feelings and sensations that are very different than like the thing you classify as pain that you were experiencing or discomfort before. So what was that sort of transition like, and how, like that part?
Chemo was the hardest thing I've ever gone through in my life. Like it gave me a whole new empathy for older people, because there were so many old people, like 30, 40 years older than me, sitting in these chairs, just doing this shit. And some of them had been doing it for 12 years. And there's so many different kinds of chemo too. I didn't know there's so many different kinds of radiation. There's so many different kinds of mixtures of the two. And just people's personalities, like their I could feel their energy in a room. I got my chemo in a group setting, and I could have chose to get it in a solo room, which me before all of this, 100% of the time would have preferred that. But I was almost glad. It was just like, I was so broken. I was like, okay, whatever they told me, I was like, all right, I'll do it there. All right. Because it was closer to my house. The private rooms were like a town away, and there weren't even that far, but I was just so lazy and so weak that I was like, all right, I'll just do it in that one. I don't care. I didn't think I was going to live. So it was just, I didn't care. Yeah. And it was all the energy of the people that I'm just like, I'm so glad everything just worked out how it was kind of supposed to. But I remember that first day sitting in that chair, and getting that poison in my body and not know how I could kind of transmute what I already knew that it was. Like I knew too much to be sitting there getting I didn't trust medicine. I didn't even take aspirin. I didn't take an antibiotic. So it was just like I hadn't been to the doctor in so many decades, and I was a medical marketer before in this like the lifetime before this. So it was just like all of this whole crazy world to now be sitting in this chair and be at the mercy of this system that I didn't trust and have this chemical in my body that I didn't believe in. It was like, I have to transmute it, and I couldn't. And I was in my weakest self. I was cut open. I just had 2 surgeries in 9 days, like one for my port and then one to be cut open. And so I was put under twice too. And then now I'm sitting here next to all these old people. I'm the youngest person in the chair. My hair hadn't started falling out yet. So I just had crazy, it was half black, half white. My whole being in this, like in the hospital, in the office, I just look like such an entity of like, what's this broad doing here? And all these old ladies and old men were looking at me like, because they know what color everything is. Everybody in there knows there's certain bag colors, certain chemical colors. And so I was getting one that they call the red devil. So everybody, right. I started calling it pink ninjas because I was like, I don't like those. I don't like that, whatever that is. But the old ladies they knew my hair was going to be falling out soon, and they all watched me, and I was the first one in the treatment every day and the last one to leave every day. My treatment was the longest. So, and it wasn't every day, it was every 3 weeks, because that's how harsh it is on your body. But I remember my first day sitting there in the chair I sat in, and I looked like, I want to sit by the window next time I come. Like, I want to sit by the window. And this one lady who was sitting by the window the whole time, when she finished her treatment, she walked out and she looked at me and she said, "Cheers." And it was just like such like her energy. She knew I was getting poisoned. She just got a long thing of poison, and she knew it made her feel like garbage. She knew it was making me feel like garbage. And then she knew I was about to be losing my hair. Every lady in there knew that I was in my first stage of this, because you can kind of tell where people are at by how much hair they have on their head. And so it was just like all of them seeing me there on my first day. And it was just cheers. It was like her inner asshole saw my inner asshole, and it made me chuckle.
You guys bumped in her assholes. Nice.
Yeah.
So my mom worked in an oncologist's office for a long time, so like I'm familiar with the setup, the sort of that how that is. And my father in 2020, like late 2020 and then through 2021, he also went through chemotherapy for like he had a particular kind of blood cancer that Eastern European Jewish men get, and for him the chemotherapy pretty much almost killed him, so they stopped. But it seemed to like they stopped early, but it seemed to have worked. Like he is pretty much in remission, or it's at such a low level that it's kind of inconsequential, right? And it hasn't seemed to sort of flare back. But what does it feel like? Like what does that what is, because I know, like, I can imagine the pain of what you were describing before. Like I've had a lot of I've had some of those kidney infections and things when I was little that really makes your back hurt. And it's hard to tell if this is an injury or if this is something wrong with the organs, but it's uncomfortable. And if you move or if you go to the bathroom, everything hurts. Like, I think I can imagine that. But
yeah, the internal pain of like, if you've had your appendix, kidneys, heart attack, maybe liver hurt, I feel like that internal has to be all kind of similar. Like that kind of pain, like if your appendix are bursting, it's got to be similar to if your spleen bursts, like whatever that kind of, or a lot of people with gallbladders. Like, I think this all kind of pain has to be similar. Yeah. Even that pain, like they're like, oh, my heart hurts so bad. And then they feel it up their arm.
Right.
Yeah. It all has to be similar shit. So the chemo stuff though, you can feel it going in you. They put a Benadryl in me first. And I have to tell everyone too, like it was not my first choice at all. But I also, with it, I asked every single nurse what their best patient did. Like, who's your survivor that you saw kick this shit's ass? And I asked every nurse, I wanted to hear their story, because people were like, do you want to talk to my other person that I know with cancer? No, I don't want to talk to anyone else with cancer. I want to talk to somebody I didn't even know had cancer. And I'm like, that person has cancer. Those are the people I want to talk to. I want to talk to the people way past me. I don't want to talk to people sitting where I'm sitting, because I feel like I'm going to die and I'm faking it right now. So, I like alkalined my body. I put everything clean in myself. I drank beet juice. I drank like everything they told me. Like, and I'm so not this person. I drank so much water. I didn't drink any coffee. Like, I did everything that I would. And you get to smoke marijuana for a living.
Right. The perks. And
yeah. Like I did. If one of my friends were like, Chaney, I saw this thing about Rick Simpson oil, I took it. If one of my friends were like, Chaney, I saw this thing about baking soda, I did it. If one of my friends were because I knew everyone just had their best intentions. And because I was a cunt at the beginning, the first chemo, I was really like, I'm just going to push everyone away from me and come back in 6 months. Like I didn't want because I was in my masculine. I was so broken. My feminine was so broken. I didn't want to be taken care of or anyone to worry about me. I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. But that first chemo, every single flu that you've ever had, like the worst flu mixed with the worst cold, mixed with the worst strep all together, because you're like bones hurt, your throat hurts. Like it hurt me to drink water. Water. Like I couldn't even swallow my own saliva. Your temples like just hurt to the touch. And like everywhere that you're about to lose hair hurts before you lose it. It starts to feel like fire. So it's like, and then you just are like, oh, my head hurts. And then you pull your hand down, you have hair in your hand and your eyebrows are coming out. And it's just like, you just give up. Like you just are like, oh, well, who cares about the hair? But it is it is a poisoning of you.
Yeah.
And you have to outlast the cancer. It's like, that's it. It's like the chemo is going to kill one of you and your spirit has to outlast the cancer. Yeah. Because it's a mental game. It's so much more mental than physical, because you're literally laying in hell. And the first week of chemo, I really thought 3 weeks had gone by. Like I thought 3 weeks. And when I looked at the calendar, and it was like, because I was borderline hallucinating. Yep. I was borderline like, I had the rigors where I was just shaking. And it's crazy too, because I think doing psychedelics in life, this is a weird, like everything happens for a reason. I'm an insomniac normally, and I've done psychedelics before. Insomnia is one of the worst side effects of chemo. Like it's one of the worst, but I'm kind of okay with it. So it didn't bother me at all. I've done psychedelics before. So that first time on chemo, when I was hallucinating, I knew I was hallucinating. Yeah. I just didn't know if it was going to stay, but I knew I was hallucinating. And so I feel like if I was just a normie that had never done that shit before, and I was staying up all night and having these mild hallucinations, it might make you feel crazy as a loon. But I kind of knew everything. And I was verbal with my wife. I was like, I'm feeling this, or this is happening. And she's like, I've read it. That's a side effect. Like just for her, it was almost like her telling me it was a normal side effect gave me lessen my anxiety. It was just like, okay, I'm not dying. This is just a side effect of chemo. Because that was the whole thing too. I was so close to death. I didn't know if I was dying or what was chemo. So it was just, but I was supposed to take 5 steroids every day, the first 5 days of chemotherapy. I didn't know this my first chemo. So I took 5 steroids for 5 days leading up to chemotherapy. So I was 20 steroids short of where I should have been. And I was supposed to be taking my steroids during my chemo. I took one steroid a day leading up to it. So I had nothing in my body. So we just call it, I raw dogged my first chemo. Because all the chemos were easy, but I don't know if it was like Reiki. I don't know if it was my mindset. I don't know, but something I just say it's the Reiki and energy. And my Reiki practitioner was like, do you know, everybody cuts cords and sends away all this bad energy and, does all that stuff. But so rarely do people let in the prayers and let in the blessings and let in the good thoughts. She's like, I need you to sit tonight, and you need to allow all that to come in. And she's like, because you are already healed. You just have to honor this journey. And so then from that point forward, anytime I heard fear in my brain, I knew it was the cancer dying, and I had to honor it on its way out.
Interesting. So, okay. So a couple of things. First of all, I don't know about you, but like Benadryl makes me hallucinate. And you just said they give you Benadryl before they gave you the chemo. Some of the most intense hallucinations I've ever had, and I've done plenty of psychedelics, have been on Benadryl, right?
It was a main line of Benadryl. And every time too, I was like, I'm going to fight this and stay up. And I couldn't. It always was like, whoop.
So it's possible that like a lot of the hallucination is coming from Benadryl, maybe in addition to the chemo, right? But I have like, so I got this bee sting on my ankle one time, like, right? Like like right where like if you're wearing like a tennis shoes, I was wearing some like Converse, like right where the tongue hits the crease in your ankle, like a bee got in there and like poked in right in that like crease right there. And my ankle swelled up to like the size of a bowling ball. My ankle was like this big, right? Like I'm allergic to certain kinds of bee stings. So I took this. So finally I decided to take Benadryl, right? And I'm sitting in my bedroom. And like, of course, like the funny part is like, you're not necessarily really clear, like when you're hallucinating or not. Right. But I've taken this Benadryl, and at a certain point, like, I think it was at night, I look over in the corner of my room, and my brother, who had passed away, a few months prior, was sitting in the corner of my room talking to me. Right. And like, but I kept like, I realized that I was hallucinating from the Benadryl or whatever. So, but this went on for several hours. Like I would kind of drift off and come up, and he was there and he was talking and whatever. And in the morning I woke up and my ankle was a little bit better. The swelling was gone. I'm not hallucinating anymore. And I go upstairs, and there's a hole in the window of the room that used to be his. And there's a baseball on the ground. And my brother had been a baseball player. Right. And that was not there the day before. Right. So I
believe in all that.
Right.
I believe there's something there wasn't a part of me when I felt like I was the closest to death that I felt like I was going to be gone forever.
Right.
It just felt like I wasn't going to be in this flesh anymore.
Yeah.
Like even when I was the closest. And my hallucination made me feel like everything was kind of in a way, and this is such a thing I don't usually subscribe to, but it made me feel like everything was singularity. And every single newspaper I had ever read, book I had ever read, everything I'd ever heard, every picture that I had ever seen, every conversation I had ever had, it was like all leading up to this moment. Like I had laid myself breadcrumbs before it that I knew I was going to be right here, right now. And now I just had to decide what the next part of the story was. It was so wild.
Some of these,
but I don't think like death. I do think it's just so, I think the veils of whatever our reality is are so much different than we think. And like that energy of a visit, I think it's as real as I dreamed about a spider being on my ceiling last night, and I woke up today and there was a spider on my ceiling.
Right. Yeah. Like that, like, right. Like it was so this was like before. When this happened for me was before I really went on the big journey that sort of brought me to the place where I'm sitting here talking to you. So that was like a real like, well, that was really weird. What was that? And then, just the way it all sort of connected. Do you like when you were describing the fight with chemo, right? Like when I listen to some of my favorite warriors, which are always tennis players, like when I'll listen to Novak or Rafa talk about that when they get into a tussle or one of these like 6-hour matches or something like this, right? That at a certain point has nothing to do with the tennis. You have to accept that you are going to suffer and you are in the absolute battle of will, right? It's completely a mental game, just like you said. Right. And it's basically becomes like one of these sort of hallucinatory states where you're like fighting with the dragon or the serpent or whatever it is on the other side of the thing. And when you were describing the cancer, like you hear A lot of people talk about the fact that like cancer may be some kind of fungus or a parasite or whatever it is. And, you know, like when that is leaving your body, like I liked the way you described about what the Reiki healer said that you needed to do, because that cancer is a formidable opponent. Like you're in a, you know, this sort of tussle, this like battle to the death of the wills, and one of you is going to die. And in this case, you know, fortunately it was the cancer. But it feels all very like a very like vision questy shamanic kind of thing, right? Like did you have any of these weird sort of, I mean, some of what you just described is that, but did you have any of like super out there experiences during this period of time that were sort of that like otherworldly nature?
I felt like I had always known I was going to shave my head for cancer my whole life. I always just thought I was going to do it for somebody else.
Right.
And when I shaved my head in the mirror, there was this power I took back. Like when my hair stopped falling out and I shaved it off. Hold on. Come on.
Cat's like, I want to be here for this part.
I know, and he's so big. He takes up the whole screen. And if we were in person, I would be like looking around him because I have to look at you when I'm talking. So what was I just saying?
You were telling me about when you shaved your head.
Oh yeah. So when I shaved my head and I kind of saw myself in the mirror, which would normally be my most masculine, it was almost like I was reclaiming my feminine and being my most amount vulnerable. It was like I was taking off all of my armor that I had always put on. I realized like my hair had always been this like put on, like I didn't wear makeup like all the other girls. The attention that I seek to get away from myself was like, look at my weird hair, like almost like how we armor ourselves up. And it was like taking that off. And I just felt so vulnerable. And I also realized that vulnerability is like this very sacred space to be. And the only time we can truly be and our most vulnerable is when we feel our most safe. And so it was like the energy of me getting to like expand my feminine, expand my nurturing and I almost felt like my heart a little bit because I started to feel other people more. And I also realized like my dad had died of cancer, you know, years before. And there was in my time being just like my dad died and going through like everything I decided to live in, the decisions of being depressed and the decisions of being sad every day. And people don't like to hear like you're making the decision because people are all like, no, there's chemical imbalances and there's all these things and we need these. Yeah, I know all that too, but I also believe most of the stuff is pushed on us by bad medicine. And it is a decision that we may wake up every day and decide to just stay in the thing that makes us sad still. And like, even with the cancer and all the throes of it, I could lay there and die from the cancer, or I could get up and go on a walk and beat the cancer today. I could lay there and die from the cancer, or I could eat this food I don't want to and beat the cancer right now. And it's like, those are kind of all the same things we're doing, but I didn't have empathy for sadness. I didn't have empathy for madness. I didn't have empathy for depression, different than those two things. And then I didn't have empathy of sorrow and death separate. Even though I had gone through it, it was like getting to witness it on my loved ones. Through, like all of a sudden the mirror, I was on the other side of the mirror and seeing their fear and their love and their like not wanting to show me their LARP almost. Some of them came with stone faces and just like, hi, here's a blanket. And some of them couldn't keep their stone faces and they just broke. And other ones avoided me. And other ones were like constantly like kept me funny. Like they were like, if I'm like, I'm going to die, they were like, you're not going to die, asshole. Like, you know, but it was just like getting to be very present and realize like, oh yeah, I'm dying of cancer, but Emily's friend's dying of cancer. And my wife's dying of cancer, and my mom's daughter's dying of cancer. And my audience, you know, maybe their favorite podcast host, it just disappeared and never told them again and just died of cancer. And maybe, you know, I have 100 friends for every one I reached out to that has no idea what's going on with me right now. And it was just like, instead of just being so selfish and being like, I have this and I'm dying and everyone pay attention to me. And because that was the LARP, I started to play and be really sad. And then I was like, shit, like, so what? We're all going to die. What are you going to do with that? Like, are you going to die and like, you're going to leave and this is just going to be the last this bad taste? Like you were you your whole life and cancer is going to get to be you at the end? Nah. So it's like I felt like I asked for this vision quest.
Yeah. So what was the moment? Because you described that like you just didn't care when they were like, oh, you have cancer and now you have to do chemotherapy. You're like, I don't care. I've been balanced through this. I'm just laying here. I'm dead. What was there a moment? And maybe this was what you were saying when you said when you started the Reiki or whatever. Was there a moment when you were like, no, I do care. Like I really care. And like it's on. Was there a moment or was that a process?
I called, I think it was a combination of 2 calls, but I think I called my kid brother and I told him I was scared. And I never, like our whole lives, if anything, he could probably say like, this bitch scared me when we were growing up, but it was actually to give him it back. But in this way of like, I need you to tell me I'm going to be okay. And we didn't have our dad. So it was like his masculine being like, you're okay, Chain. You got it. It was like, it switched everything. Cause I never gave my kid brother that before, but it was like him. I got to be his kid sister for a moment. And I had done it for both my siblings and my mother, but getting him doing it for me. I don't know why he was the last person I called to be like, I'm so scared, but it definitely was like him saying I was going to be okay. And then the Reiki, it was like everything happened at the same time. It was like a drug trip. And then I just laid for one whole day. And then I let it get all sank in. I felt like I peeled out of that flesh. And then I was reborn. Like I was bald and weak, but I was going to walk better tomorrow. And I was going to eat better the day after. And it was like a little baby. Like I had to, and one of my friends who has a million kids and she's a great mom and I don't have kids. So I don't have this kind of like connection for things like that. I love, but not to mother the child. And I just think that it must be the highest level of love. And she told me, Chaney, you have to take care of yourself like you're your own precious baby. And having that amount of love for myself, like I was my own precious baby. It was like all these things came together. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be good on the other side.
How long was the process of chemo for you? For how many? I mean, I know I started communicating with you a little bit while you were still going through it, but I think you were over the hump by the time that we started sort of communicating about it. Like, how long was that process?
My first, I got out of the hospital on like February 14th. And I feel like I started chemo like a week or 2 later. And then I was done on June 22nd.
Okay. What day did you go to the hospital?
Like February 7th or something.
That's okay.
My
mom died on February 4th. Right. So like that was kind of like right all there in that period of time. And I had such an unusual experience with what happened when she went, right. In terms of like, and sort of energy and an interesting communication that I felt. So, but it was like an energy sort of blast went off.
Not that anyone's ready for it, but were you waiting for your mom to pass away or was it completely stunning?
So I don't want to get too far off track with this, but I just want to say the reason that I wanted to ask, and I'm happy to talk about it at some point. But the reason that I asked was just because there was this amount of like energy surge when she went. And I was curious about like what your timing was just in alignment with that because of the way sort of things played out. So that was why I asked the question. But so like she had been declining, like my mom had dementia. And it really started in 2015 it moved from like, okay, it's cute. Mom's memory is a little weird, right? To being difficult in 2015. And then, the normal process was ensuing, but I will say that in her particular case, it drastically started accelerating with every poke, right? With every, it kind of was moving along at a certain pace. And then suddenly it was like this, and every time it was worse. But what had happened was her husband had called us like when like on a Saturday and said, oh, she's really starting to decline. You guys should probably come. And so both of us are thinking, okay, well, let's see, like me and my sister, my sister lives in Boston. When can we go? And we were thinking of scheduling it for sometime like the next week. Maybe we're going to go the next weekend. And then the next day he's like, no, like you guys really need to come. So we both arrived there on like a Monday morning and we stayed all week. And during that period of time, we transitioned her into a hospice. And like she had the typical thing that happens when people with Alzheimer's or dementia are at the end of their life, and that when the loved ones show up, there is a bounce back. It was a pretty extreme bounce back. So when we got there, she wasn't moving or wasn't talking. She was like in a hospital bed in their living room. And then with a day and like later that day and a little bit the next day, she was sort of communicating with the eyes and a little bit with us, letting us feed her. But then like the second or third day that we were there, we show up and she's like up walking around, sitting at the table, like talking, but then she would lay down and go to sleep and go in and out. And you know, there was about a day and a half of like pretty much one afternoon where it was like, wow, this is like the most meaningful communication we've had with her in a couple of years. But there was like a day and a half of like that sort of surge. And then it was interesting how quickly it sort of deteriorated. We moved her into a hospice. And, you know, after we had been there a week, we both had to go because I had to go back to work. And my sister has a baby that she had to leave with her husband because it just wasn't an appropriate situation for the baby. So we had to leave. So my sister left on Sunday and I left on Monday. And then she passed the following Friday night. She kind of hung on for about a week. Where they were just kind of increasingly giving her medication and trying to make her comfortable and whatnot. But when she passed, what was interesting is like it was late at night I'm pretty sure it was a Friday night, right? I'm pretty sure it was Friday night. And I was sleeping. It was probably like 1 or 2 in the morning, and I was having this dream. And in the dream, I was having a dream about having sleep paralysis, right? So like I generally I'm a person who's had an interesting experience my whole life with sleep paralysis to varying degrees, but I couldn't tell if I was actually having sleep paralysis or having a dream that I was having sleep paralysis, right? So in the dream, I'm like, it was this weirdest, I've never had this. And at a certain point, this voice goes, oh, we call that old hag. And then my phone rang and it was my sister calling. And she said, like, mom just passed. Right. And so I did this show like with my friend Nish and JJ, and we were looking into like the legend of, that's literally what they call sleep paralysis, is old hag. And
I've never heard that.
I didn't know that.
So interesting.
And that legend like literally talks about what was happening, what was going on with my mom during that time, and like how that experience in the dream was and whatever, right? It was like it was very clear that week. Like we talked about it for probably like an hour and a half on a show that was supposed to have been about something else, right? But it was very interesting, sort of the way like that she came to me, like the way that all happened, right? And sleep paralysis was something that my mom and I share, like an experience we shared in our life that like a lot of people do not understand about sleep paralysis. And my mom and I had a very unusual relationship, and I wouldn't say she was the easiest person to like relate to in like a mother-daughter kind of way, but that was something that she did always really understand. And my suspicion is that the reason she understood was because she was experiencing it for the same reason that I was. And so it's kind of like probably one of the few things, some of the things that were bonded.
Did you feel like your mother was more of a custodian to you than a mother? Like your energy was put here and she raised you, this energy? I don't know, maybe star seeds or indigo kids or whatever thing that people want to say. I always theorize like, my mom always, I know she's my mom. I came from her womb, but she always my parents always felt custodian to me. Like I always saw the love people had with their parents. Mm-hmm. And I always felt foreign to that idea.
That's a good question. Okay. So I have definitely asked myself the question of whether my parents are really my parents many times. But there's obvious like traits.
I like that we're both sitting here as grown ass women. Like this is such a 12-year-old conversation.
Right?
This is my favorite shit.
Okay. So I definitely have like there's a lot of things about me that are very different, not only than my parents, but than everyone else in my family. Like I'm quite a bit smaller than most of the other people in my family. I have perfect vision, right? All of this, everyone in my family is blind as a bat, just not the type of body type that I have, certainly not the skin color that I have. Like they're all pretty pale and like I'm, pretty dark and just a different kind of person in a lot of ways. But if I look at the pictures of my mother when she was like 4 or 5, you'd think it was the picture of me, right? Like I'm obviously this person's child, and I definitely have probably the least attractive traits about both of my parents, right? My sister probably got like their best qualities. My mom left when I was 6. And she was around, like we went to her on weekends and vacations and things, but she wasn't very motherly. It was more like having a friend you went like shopping and lunch with and vacations. And she had a very limited emotional range that was probably, when I say this, probably, I'm not trying to like dissociate myself from the feeling, but I think I experienced it differently now than I would describe it then than I would describe it now. It was probably pretty painful for me because I saw how other kids were with their mothers. And so my father had like an outsized role of responsibility that made me simultaneously, like, I really love my dad. I haven't had a close relationship with him. I still do, despite the fact that we had many really, really challenging years when I was like completely lost in drugs and down the conspiracy rabbit hole so hardcore that like it hurt me to live in this reality. And I had to figure my way out of that. And that definitely took a toll on my relationship with my dad, but we seem to be past that. But like there was a love for him and also a resentment that both of them became outsized because his role became outsized because my mother wasn't really able to equally participate, even though she did spend time with us and she definitely contributed financially. My mother for a good portion of my life was the bigger breadwinner than my father. So she certainly supported us and all of that kind of stuff. At this point, like I'm in an evolving situation of the understanding of my family. And the more I become aware of the science and the mechanics behind secret societies and behind processes like alchemical marriage and things like that, and also looking at other people in my family, other clusters like cousins and things like that, that like we seem quite different. We're not very close, but within their family structure, there seems to be a template that is also the one present in my core family and whatnot. Like, I think that something pretty intentional was going on with my parents coming together and having children. And, I'm beginning like I told you when we sort of chatted, on email or text or whatever, like I'm doing this whole series on the periodic table that I just kind of started, that in some ways was inspired by you because you really turned my attention to how much of a factor the elements were in like the game that I love and use to sort of project all my ideas sort of on. And the more and more and more that I look at the periodic table, like I actually think it's what all of the grand stories like the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita and all this kind of stuff is really about. It's like encoding these alchemical processes and combinations and stories and that like masonry is like, and various different secret societies and certain scientific or spiritual or metaphysical practices at their inner core are really working with that. And then of course the exoteric stuff is the nonsense just to mind control people and distract them while, but whatever it is.
That's so interesting because even in math, if you think about all the little, like when you're first learning like algebra, and then when you go on to geometry, and then when you go on to calculus, all the little formulas that you learn to solve the equations or whatever, they all are little stories.
Yeah.
Like they tell you just in a short way. So you remember like, oh, I have to do the parentheses and then I have to do the multiplication before I do the subtraction. And I have to take care of the fraction on the outside. It teaches you the order that you have to do that to get the right answer, just with telling you like, and Jimmy fishes on Wednesday for carp. And then that'll be, like,
right. Like it's weird. And so like, since like when my dad sold our house in Chatsworth in 2017, I found a box of documents that belonged to my mother that I've been working with for a couple of since that point. And I've talked about them in different shows, and that I've evolved the position on what I think they mean and whatnot. But, I also like, my dad, since his sickness, has become more open to discussing some of these topics from the perspective that I'm coming at about my mother, right? He kind of like, dusts off any idea I might have about him, but he's willing to engage in conversations about maybe my mother was a bit more mysterious than he realized, or whatever it is. But like where I stand right now, and this is like ongoing me search and research, like at this point all my research has become me search.
That's so right? True though. Yeah, that's a good
and I'm evolving, but like I think that my mother was here as like so she represents ruthenium on the periodic table. My mom's name was Ruth Ann Moyer, right? And ruthenium is element 44 on the periodic table. She was born in 1944 with a lot of the qualities of the element ruthenium, which is related to the goddess Ruth, who is a main figure in the feminine masonry lines and whatnot. And I think that this was intentional. Like, I think that they know when the child is coming in at a certain time. And I think when we're talking about bloodlines, what we're talking about is either percentages of certain elements in the blood or the resonance of somebody's blood code with specific elements. And so like you're trying to arrange, you're naming the child, like Benjamin talked to me about nominative determinism. Like you're both naming the child because it's true about something about them, about their ancestry or whatever, but you're also wanting them to, that to be their action in the world, like that to be sort of the thing that they do. And I'm trying to understand like a little bit more about my father and like where they come together and what that means that I am. But it's definitely appears to be what I'm learning about the alchemical marriage and how that process is achieved and what the result of that is. With the first child, and I'm the first child. So I think my mom comes from a deeply Masonic family. She's from Euclid, Ohio, i.e. Euclidean geometry. And I think that her entire life was a process of what Michael Hoffman would call mystical toponymy, which is going through the stages of like initiation through the places you are and the things you're involved in and whatnot. And so like, that's kind of where I'm at with her. And so I think that she was probably pretty heavily experimented on at UCLA throughout her life. Like she went there, like her dad wanted her to go to Stanford. And he was upset that she went down to UCLA, which at that time was called the Little Red Schoolhouse, like because he thought all communists went there or whatever. But my mom had some pretty interesting conditions with her eyes that left her sort of under the care of the same doctor for most of her life, and spending a lot of time at the Jewel Stein Eye Institute at UCLA, which is becoming a stranger and stranger place the further I look into it. And so I think that, my mom and I share a connection that is based around a lot of those things. And so while I didn't always feel, she was always very nice to me. And while I didn't really feel very close to her, and I didn't feel like that motherly thing, I think that she was never able to do this, what I'm doing here with you, about the weird things that she felt were going on in her world. So it became, I think Alzheimer's is the end point for an MKUltra person who doesn't ever deprogram, right? Mm-hmm. And the process of sort of figuring out what's going on with yourself, and then being able to talk about it, be able to make sense of it, and being able to create like a narrative for yourself, to reframe that into something that turns it into an experience instead of something that you were a victim of, allows you to sort of move forward in your life. And I don't think she ever did. Like, I think that it just kind of collapsed inside. Some of the shit she said when she was, you know, in the dementia years, everyone else just thought she was like talking crazy nonsense. What she was saying made sense. She was clearly offering commentary on a reality that was distinct and there, just outside of the awareness of all of the people around her. It was quite coherent, and it was incredibly esoteric, some of it. And like, if you go looking into some of these like initiatory ceremonies or processes or things about alchemy, that seems to be what she was describing. Like, I talked about that with Nish and JJ in that same show where we talked about the old hag thing, right? That some of the things she would say, it's like, were actually like deeply meaningful from like a specific perspective.
Well, if we're all different elements and we don't have different combinations or different elements that are higher to us, or even if our names are calling different elements, and that's what all this is about, we also, like what seance science tells us, is that maybe them eating out of tin cans and eating out of all that canned food for however many generations is part of what contributes to their Alzheimer's now. And so then if you're like going to really mess with an element, what are those elements in all the cans? I really didn't know a vegetable. Like, I didn't know broccoli grew. Like, I didn't know broccoli was fresh, because my grandparent, like who I'm thinking of with Alzheimer's, everything was out of a can. And then my parents, everything was flash frozen. So it was just like that different generation from a can to flash frozen. But I didn't know it was fresh until I started, got to college. Like, I didn't even know how people ate. So it's just like elementally, like what is that little bit? If they're like, we're going to add tin into this, or we're going to add aluminum into this, or we're going to add, whatever these other metals are that maybe aren't as conductive, or because that's what I wonder sometimes, they just shock our heart back to life. Like, we're electricity, and they just chink, shock us back to life. And so then they put in metals that aren't as conductive into us. And we have these natural metals in us that are like gold and silver.
One of the things about ruthenium is that it is super conductive, right? Like, my mother, like her. So yes, other things could come in and reduce her conductivity. But I think also, like, if this is part of what like blood codes and bloodlines are about, is like either the sort of amount of something that is the whatever the recipe is that makes up your blood code or your genetics or whatever it is, if it's in there, or if it's something that the way yours puts together like resonates with that element or sort of vibrates in a way that there's this connectivity, then like, I think that's a realm. Like, we live here, we share space in this thing that seems to be largely dominated by like carbon, and we have some hydrogen and some oxygen and right, but everything else seems to be like in smaller amounts. But my guess would be that there are other vibratory levels or realms that where other elements are more dominant, right? And so as you begin to lose touch with this one, either when you're unwell or at the end of your life or the degradation of your system, then that other realm that you're resonating with starts to become more prominent. And it's almost like you're split between here and there. So I feel like she was offering commentary on another realm that was coherent to her, but certainly like, for her husband, who is nothing like her genetically, right, at all, like is, right, and nothing like her personality wise, and certainly doesn't have anywhere near the level of imagination. She's just talking crazy. He's not paying even close enough attention to realize like she's kind of explaining the same thing over and over again and adding detail to it. It's not like she's describing one thing and then something else random that has nothing to do with it, or whatever. It just all crazy all sounds the same to him. Yeah. Right.
Like it would to a lot of normies in the world about what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
So it's like the levels of it. Here's another weird thing I'm thinking of right now while you're saying it. So if they've slowly taken us off AM, or ham to AM to FM to eventually satellite. It's like they keep wanting our radio frequency to get further and further away from ground, and higher and higher radio frequency, almost like we're a low, like what they would call a lower frequency we could speak to each other in. It's almost like they're slowly taking us away. If there's telecommunication, and we all used to have these high metals in us, and they're trying to mess up that telecommunication by injecting bad metals in us and spraying it over our heads. So if we were having natural abilities that were starting to come into play, or if certain of us, let's say I was wired silver and you were wired silver and your mom's ruthenium, but another person is that too, could we communicate together because we're on the same frequency of metals?
Right.
You know, like, so it's like bloodlines. Could these bloodlines where they're like, the mom, she knows something's wrong with her kids. Like DNA is just something the seance tells us about now. What about if it's something so much like, well, she speaks to them because they're wired by the same actual radio frequency and energy.
Have you ever looked at, are you familiar with Walter Russell's periodic table where he has it divided into octaves?
No, but I've seen it before, but I'm writing it down on my list to look.
Okay, so I'm pulling it up right now.
Oh, perfect.
Just what I mean in terms of the octaves. Let me see if I can find the clearest one to pull up. All right. So if you can see here, it's in different groups. So maybe what you're talking about, like maybe my mom has, so ruthenium is right here, right, in the 7th octave group, right? But the strontium is there too. And that's something we hear is in the stuff that they spray and whatnot, right? So maybe it has a different effect on her. But like maybe everybody who's who sort of has elements that resonate in this octave, like have a degree of being able to sort of communicate back and forth or to be able to resonate with each other, or maybe like the 7th octave is able to communicate with the 6th and the 8th, or you know what I mean? Like, but the way this is arranged.
Also that you said the octave, because octave, like,
yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So imagine if, because this is a big thing with magic, is harmonics with different, thoughts where they'll tone together, and it can be anything from sex magic to weather manipulation to whatever, and it's all just by tonal, by a certain coven or group or wizards all getting together and they mess with tones. Imagine if your group of people that you practice with, and villages knew this, they all represented different parts of this harmonics, so their resonation when they was an exact chord on this. So let's say I had a problem in my spleen and your chord hit that healing. So you'd get a whole bunch of people that their chord hit healing my spleen. And then I could go into those Tartarian buildings, so to speak. You guys would all, somebody played on an organ, and it would heal me.
Yeah. Well, I think they also, even if I'm understanding what he was saying correctly, like I was listening to Christopher Gardner on with Robert Phoenix like 2 months ago, and they were talking about the Roman fasces, right? And how like it was a sound kind of weapon, like there was something making a sound, like it was a little bit back, so I don't remember exactly what was happening, but the people who were part of the group, the military group or whatever, they had these fasces that resonated with this other sound that was being generated that was like almost like a weapon or created chaos for everybody else, except for the people that had the fasces that vibrated, that strummed with the same thing. So they were able to stay organized while everybody else was in chaos, right? So like, I think that similarly with this, right? Those elements that are in those same octave groups, right? There's a relationship between those that is different than ones that are outside of their octave or group. And then I'm sure the different octaves have relationships or harmonies or disharmonies with each other as well. Right.
Even Rumpelstiltskin, like turning hay, like you're taking one element and turning it into a different element by tonal stuff. So, and we always see her like she has a spindle and she cuts herself on the spindle, and like the way we see it, what if it wasn't something for sewing? But that too, I have a whole different like conspiracy about that. But what about if it was an instrument? What about if she was playing something and cut herself? I mean, because she was up in there turning hay into gold.
Yeah, I mean, certainly strumming something, but there's certainly with all kinds of music. Like I've even experienced this with electronic music where it feels like the sound is unraveling out of the speaker to me.
Yeah.
Like in the way that you're describing with her working with the spindle. I mean, obviously a DJ is turning records on the turntable, so it's spinning it around.
Is it Apollo that plays a harp? There's a god that he plays a harp.
Which god plays a harp? God playing harp. Let's see.
I feel like Pan does too.
Yeah, it's Apollo.
Like and I feel like each string of his harp, it might have even been later on that
Apollo gave Orpheus the harp. So I don't know if Orpheus played the harp or Apollo did, but it says Orpheus's music was sweeter than that. So the god Apollo gave the man who was Orpheus a harp, but it seems like.
And then even think of the word harpy.
Yeah.
Like even think of the word siren. Like all those words represent harmonics and tone.
Yeah.
So what if there is a divine thing that like somewhere we're actually missing between precious metals and tone? So then we see, you know, how snowflakes, they're all different. To me, this is proof that tone is making weather.
Like, I think there's like the snowflakes look a lot like some of the sacred geometry or mandala things. And like a lot of people talk about that as being frozen music. So a snowflake would literally be like a frozen tone or rhythm.
Is it cymatics?
Cymatics, yeah.
Cymatics. I always say that word.
Cymatics is the sand on the tape.
Yeah. That's what, so I almost think it looks like that. So it's almost proof. Like imagine if certain tones made certain elements. And so we always knew that over these riverbeds, it was going to rain particles of gold because the tone made it hit that way. So we have to find the delta to get this element out of it.
Yeah.
Like what if like the powers that be kind of know these things of what turns into what by where it hits on this. And I do think as above, so below, as within, so without, that we are the elements of this place. Like if it's salt water, we're salt water. If it's gold, we're gold. If it's carbon, we're carbon. Like whatever element you pick on it, but it doesn't mean the whole earth is just Chaney or the whole earth is just Emily, but maybe the whole earth is the combination of all of us. And that's why we kind of need everybody's metals to be so clean, because like, I'm not going to have the same thing as you and your family. And that like me comparing myself to your superpowers all the time is going to make me weaker. But if I just honor your superpowers and then mine are different because my metals are different, you know,
I think that the metals are really key here. Like one of the things that was interesting when I was going down the ruthenium rabbit hole, because literally all of this connective stuff just unfolded in the middle of a show one time. Like we kept discovering another thing and it all threaded. So the place where there's the largest deposit of ruthenium in the ground is in Oklo, Gabon, right? There is a 2 billion year old natural fission reactor there. That the ruthenium is a byproduct of that, and ruthenium is super conductive, so it's able to withstand. It's able to withstand that. Gabon is the country where they do iboga, right? And so we tweeted. How do I say it? The tweety, the Weethi. I can't think of the name of the tribe right now, right? But they like this weird sort of like percussive drumming music that they use in their ceremonies with the iboga. The only time I ever saw my mother like get excited and really react to any of my music, because I like electronic music and that just does, for some people that just doesn't, that's not their thing. Like I like techno, but I like some of the really tribal sounding stuff that had like this drumming, right? And my mom would get all excited, like you would see like her face would light up. And when I listened to the music of that tribe that they do during the iboga ceremonies, it sounded exactly like the parts in that music, right? So whatever it is, like that metal, ruthenium, and that frequency goes together to bring out whatever those said superpowers are. I don't know how much you know about iboga, but it has like some pretty interesting properties and characteristics, both in the way it's used tribally, but also in the way it's been experimented with in projects and programs and things like that and whatnot. But to me, whatever's happening there is the bark that iboga is on that tree, it's uptaking the ruthenium from the ground and then decoding that sort of into the experience that is providing.
It's interesting that you said it's bark. Even the word bark and that it's bark, but even the like sound, the drumming, the like doosh, doo, doo, like how different that energy is compared to some other psychedelics that you might take.
Yeah.
Like how like some things like I think, and I might be wrong on this, but I think like Pythagoras was super huge into the harp as well. And he thought like so much of his healing. I don't want to get the wrong philosopher, but I'm almost positive it was Pythagoras. But then you look into like the Pythagorean theorem and how like so much stuff with numbers. So we have this number thing with harmony and like, and that has to be with metals too. Like there has to be a harmonic take with all the metals. And like testing your metal and mental metal and even everything, the metals or woods that these instruments are made out of. When you look at the finest instruments in the world that are going to make the best tones, they're made out of precious shit.
Yeah. Special wood, special, like,
hair from living animals.
Strings. Yeah. Right. Like even like with tennis rackets, like there's certain some of the tennis strings are made from animal. I can't, right. It's very, some of them are now synthetic materials. What was I going to say? Has Juan ever talked with you about the Pythagorean palaces?
Oh, the mind palaces?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So that was something like that he got into after the first time I ever had a chat when I was talking about the interdimensional architecture here and whatnot. But I think that that's what it is. Like, I think when there is a frequency that resonates with whatever is in your body, right, a secondary space opens up. Right. That is not necessarily present for sort of everybody else. It's kind of like, there's like pocket dimensions that are, maybe the pocket dimensions are the realms of these elements or minerals, right? That like, when the right sound is hit and that metal is present, that opens up that frequency for those, like that space for those who can resonate with it. And I think that's largely, that is why people would be really smart, I think, to understand what is underneath the ground that these things are built on, right? Not there's an underground bunker there, not they're doing rituals down there, though that all may be true. What is the makeup of the dirt beneath your feet, right?
I think all the dirt stuff too, and something that I've totally been on that I've just been obsessed with, like over the last few weeks before I went to the Bahamas, is I kept drawing the picture of like, I was thinking of as above, so below, but I always think of the monolith in DC. I always go back to this because it's representative to me of the Vesica Pisces. Everyone sees the monument, but the Vesica Pisces is just as represented, but you'd only see the Vesica Pisces from above and you only see the monument from below. So it's like this, there's so much interesting stuff in this to me. And so I was like, what if underground is just as big as above ground? Like energetically, what if it has to be in these elements to provide the free energy? Like I was thinking of Tesla energy in this, or, even if it was some kind of ritual or loosh, what would be going on underneath? If they were really absorbing something from us as a collective, what elementally would have to be there for this energy to happen? But I kept thinking of it, instead of it being equal above and equal below, I keep thinking of everything separated into thirds, because 33 is a big number for them. And somewhere in the Masons, we went from 32 to 33. And what I really believe is the 33 is the infinite. Half of us, 16, if you want to take the number 32, 16 is right, 16 is left, 16 is red, 16 is blue, 16 is female, 16 is male, 16 is masculine, 16 is feminine, 16 is dark, 16 is light, but 1 is none of those things. 1% is infinite and attached to something bigger than you in the whole. And so I started to separate everything in my head into thirds. So if as above, a third, as below, 2/3. And then I started to get the symbol of the cross a lot, because now you get this line in between it of where ground would be.
Yeah.
So then I also started to see the symbol of a kite a lot. And then you're thinking of same thing. If everything's just a story and it's not as like, oh, Benjamin Franklin flying a kite with a key on the end of it to prove electricity, or is it the shape of a kite and he's showing us with that string a key to something bigger?
Right. Well, the shape of the kite it does embody the cross. And so
yes. And so then it's like the key is on the end of it. And everyone's like, well, that's conductivity and that's this thing. What about he's actually showing us a key to something by putting a key there? What if it's a keystone to us with free energy? What if it's like those who give up liberty for freedom? Like Ben Franklin said that. So
right,
it's
for
like
security. Yeah.
So it's like, at what point is all this electricity some part of security that we never needed from them?
Yeah.
Like, and so it's all conductivity again, all these metals, all this stuff. Like, we're almost all boxed in squares by copper.
Yeah.
All of us, all the walls in our house, all our neighborhoods are boxed in. And that was like all by design, like almost the wires that why we're all paying attention to free energy and what we should be getting. I'm like, but what are all these wires doing to us right this second, holding in? So we can't feel each other when I'm inside my house. I can't feel your Taurus. I can't feel my neighbor's Taurus because I'm inside these walls.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And we've even been taught to think that that's a good thing because we've been taught to hate our neighbors. And so we want them separate from us. And
metal roofs now. Like, look at all the oldest villages in the world. They all had natural roofs. Most of them had trees, what used to be the dead trees as their roof. Their cover used to be their cover. And now we have metal roofs.
Yeah. We have been talking a lot about, like, in my various like groups and different shows I have with different hosts, sort of what is the process behind the story of Jesus nailed to the cross, right? Like, what are we looking at? And like, I think it has something to do with what happens either when light hits certain particular elements, right? And the sort of radiant aura that goes, or the something that is emitted when like two specific particles come together and there's an energy sort of given off. And I'm, we're having conversations about like the God particle and like, is that actually what God is? Is God really like, it's a particle. It's a particle that like when it is, when light hits it at a certain angle, like it sort of generates an array or a light angle dimension that is like, something's kind of what we were talking about, the Pythagorean palace, right? But a few months ago, I was having a conversation with Danny, who I do a lot of shows with, and we were talking about somehow the conversation included the free energy. And we were talking about the book, The Keys of Enoch by J.J. Hertak or whatever. And we both have read it, but we decided we need to go back and read it again because we understand things now that we didn't understand when we read it before. And it might make different sense. But I think one of the things that we have been unclear about what free energy, like everybody thinks of it as it means it's endless, it's everywhere. And also that like, oh, you would get it for free. It's not metered. You don't have to pay for it, like whatever. But what if there's all of this energy that is waiting for us to free it, right? That is waiting to be unlocked, and that what we're supposed to do is free the energy, right? And this is, I don't know if this is like something stored in a compartment underground or something inside of us, right? Like there's something that we have abstained from intentionally or accidentally, or something that we have withheld from ourselves or that has been withheld, that is that key to sort of unlock this. And I do think that, it does have something to do with our insides, because we have the symbol, the Templar's cross. The Templar's cross is literally the symbol for the birth of the creation of a light photon. Have you ever seen a light photon come into existence?
Yeah.
It looks exactly like the Templar's cross. And then we have the red cross that goes around collecting blood whenever there's a trauma or an event, right? Yes. And so when someone has had an adrenaline rush and then they give their blood, I think that whatever the
what makes me crazy about this too? The opposite flag of the blood bank is the Swiss flag. So it's like the bank thing with this symbol is a really big deal. And they're also showing you that your blood is currency. Yeah. I've never thought about the thing about the Swiss bank accounts, but I've definitely noticed that it's the inversion. I have a St. George thing where I always like everything with the St. George, Georgia flag, even for the country and the state. Mm-hmm. I think that St. George is represented in Georgia being on top of Florida because Florida's the dragon. I think a lot of the Egyptian hieroglyphs are stolen animals from the Americas that don't really exist in Egypt. Like, I don't think it's a crocodile. I think it's a gator. Like the Anubis is here, the ibis is in Florida. And I think that there's been so much inverted history that's gone on that Egypt's not the Great Pyramids. And that's the biggest marketing ploy of all time, is just when you put something, the great, whatever it is, that's not the greatest thing. That's just marketing. And so I think all of that shit's really in the Americas. And that's why the Americas looked like that. It looks like every other country in the world really melted here. It's really because we all came from here and then went to every other country in the world. And so,
it's complete inversion. So
complete.
Okay. So shout out to my friend Prashant, who's going to love that I'm about to ask you this question. But are you familiar with the theory that Texas is really Egypt?
Yes, I think I'm into the, like, Florida. If it's not Israel, the original, it is Atlantis. I think what Disney took in the swamp of the middle of Florida in Orlando, which I think the O town of Orlando is just the I. I think it's interesting that the highest parts of electricity go right, like if you see the most lightning strikes, they're like right across this row. If you take Disney World and go right down the B line, BEE, because they love that symbolism, it goes right to NASA, or which is now SpaceX. It's just one straight road right to the coast. I think it's interesting that Mar-a-Lago is where it's at, down on the coast, because it's like sea and lagoon. Everywhere, Mar is always sea, so it's all holy sea to me when they do these names on things. But I think Texas is Egypt because you have Palestine there. It's like a Middle East, a whole thing. You have I think the supercomputer, if you want to get into Tyler, Texas, and that talk. But then I also think if you go up the Grand Canyon, this could be talks of where we see a Red Sea split, like that talk of Noah. I think that actually there's a split in the Red Canyon that looks like a drudge to me. And if you go further up, the unsaid thing that no one's talking about is I think Utah and the Mormons actually stole a religion from the Moors, which were the ancient, really Nubian seafaring people. I think they were dark as fuck. I think they followed the stars like Zoroastrians.
I know Zoroastrians.
Yeah. I think they followed the stars the same way. I think the Moors, the reason that you even look at the makeup and why they tried to scare so many black people off the sea. You came here in slave ships. They tried to do all that shit because they look at their skin. They were the farers of the sea. The melanin didn't hurt them to be in the ocean during the sunshine. So it's like, I think even Haiti, I think that's like almost like the last place that the Moors almost crashed. And I think all up through Utah is maybe where, if you were to take a Messiah walking on water, it would happen in the Salt Flats, because I think the Great Salt Lake actually was a Great Salt Lake and a trading port at one time. I think they closed it off like they're trying to do to the Gulf of Mexico now. I think the Gulf of Mexico is the original World Trade Center. The only way into it was through the Florida Keys. And I think the Yucatan Peninsula attached to Cuba and Cuba attached to Florida. And I think Florida was all of South Georgia, all the way over to Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, down through Mexico. And that's why the Incas and the Seminoles all have very similar garb. I think Miami and Mayans sound the same for a reason. I think everybody should look into it. I think Tennessee, I'm old enough to remember that the fucking Mississippi River flowed backward.
Yeah.
And now they're just trying to be like, oh, that's just the Nile. No, it happened here too. And now they're trying to erase it. Like our Mississippi used to flow in the other direction. And so then you think of all through Tennessee and all the Masonic shit they have there. We have all mounds all through our country that we're not allowed to look through. We're not allowed to go in our Grand Canyon. We're only allowed in little parts of our natural forest.
We're allowed to like walk on a weird glass thing above it, right?
Or what's parks? Go into Yellowstone. Where are you really allowed to go in Yellowstone? Where are you really allowed to go in the Redwoods? Where are you really allowed to go in the Everglades? If you go to China, where are you really allowed to go? Or they're just like, here's Hong Kong. And then you have to go with one of our dignitaries to this little part. If you go to Ukraine, where are you really allowed to go? How much is real?
It's like that everywhere. I mean, like the thing that I focus on the most, about where I grew up in Chatsworth, like the most important parts of Chatsworth, you're not allowed to go to. You have to get permission and go on a day pass. And this is like a suburb that most people have never heard of. Like, why do I need to get permission to walk around in the mountains in Chatsworth? Right. So I agree. They have us cordoned off into like controlled zones for sure. So a couple of things. I like your idea about the Mormons and the Moors. Michael and I definitely got into talking quite a bit about the Moors at a certain point in the
they're the Hopi Indians and the Mormons. It's a little mixed, but there's so much about the star things. And if you take into Zoroastrianism, I always say it wrong too. If you take in that into account, there's so much about an ancient tribe, the Hopi, and then the Mormons. And there's something about, is it off planet or underground? Because the Hopi with ant people, I'm obsessed with this right now. This is where I
think everything that they say is space is really in the ground. Like I've been preaching that sermon for a long time. Also, Freddie Mercury was Zoroastrian, right? And like that's, so there we have an element in a planet, and we have
Mercury. Totally.
Who could had a range that most people, and a cathedral, unlike almost anybody else, whatever people think of any of the conspiracies around that or anything, like he was here representing something in the same way that I was speaking about, like with my mother, with the ruthenium and the elements and whatever, right? He was here sort of, as the, with that as his nominative determinism, as whatever Benjamin would say. The Moors thing, the Moors are really interesting. And Michael and I got into like this one group. What was the name of that group in Indianapolis? There was like a tribe of Ben something or other. Like we were getting pretty far into looking into some of that. There's a techno, it's hard, like when you were talking about techno music, you usually have like producers or DJs, but there was a duo or a group called Drexia from Detroit, that the whole thing is about that, what you were talking about with the seafaring people, like their whole mythology around their music. I think they've encoded that story that you're talking about. And I've been for a long time meaning to go do a deep dive on them. For all the years, I never heard of them. Someone at a party one night started telling me about Drexia, and I was like, I've never heard of this. What are you talking about? And they're sort of friends with or correlated to the DJ and producer Jeff Mills. And Jeff Mills is a freak of nature that like Lindsay and I have talked about him before and whatever. Like he is definitely not the same as the rest of us. And so some partner he used to work with was the guy who started Drexia. So I don't know if they're telling separate stories about the two distinct groups of people that they kind of come from or whatnot, but this conversation is making me want to go look at this Drexia thing. If you look it up, you'll find that like they have some book about these people that fell off into the sea when they were coming over on the boat, and then whatever, some other world under there. And like, it's pretty deep, right? You're like, you guys are techno DJs. Like, what are you actually, like, there's no words in your music. Like, what are you actually talking about here? But like, I think people have taken to encoding the things that have been passed down in their family traditions into increasingly unusual and esoteric places because they're not for everybody. Right.
And maybe to tell it for little kids to remember.
Yeah.
I think the only way, because I think two things. One, the underground. What if our ancestors were really our aunt sisters?
That sounds right.
And so then the Hopi idea of what they draw, of what the underground language that they speak, they draw an ant figure. The alien looking figure looks just like that ant figure, and Lamb, who Aleister Crowley goes into the desert and does a whole bunch of ritual, looks just like that ant figure. And so then I'm like, Lamb, was it Lamb, or could it have been a lowercase L? Could it have been I am? And how we keep hearing all this, that you're not supposed to call yourself I, and I'm not supposed to call you, we're all I am.
Right.
Is that all lamb? And so then you think of how much sheep symbology they do to us. They sheep us all the time. Yeah. Is it sheep, lamb, I am? Is it all the same? Because the word you, if I just call you EWE, I'm calling you a sheep.
Yeah.
And so if I say I, what am I calling myself but one of their eyes with it? Like, I'm calling my I. So I and sheep. So I'm like, what is all their symbology all the time with I and sheep? And I'm like, this ant, like that we have our aunt sisters. We live under, I know there's like a whole bunch of things where feminism isn't has nothing to do with us living under a patriarchal system. Like this needs to be separated, because the idea of to me, our matriarchal has been given over to the idea of a queen of England. And that's what it means to be matriarchal, when I don't think that's our energy at all. And so I think somewhere we've had our ancestors stolen from us. Like you always hear about the daughters of man. The sirens are the daughters of man. The mermaids were the daughters of man, and they had Nephilim. They had giants out of their womb, and then they get banished to the sea. You always hear and I'll just tell you, in my lesbian self, I just can't think of anything more appealing. I get it. If I were an angel or a devil, I get it. If you could make me go against my God, it might be for the daughters of man. Because goddamn, right?
Okay, so there's a couple of other things you said that I don't want to lose. First of all, have you read the book Time Rivers by Goro Adachi?
I'm the least read person.
Okay, so it's an interesting book, but that he talks about the parallels between the Nile and the Mississippi, and he correlates them with the flow of time and how the different spots are indicators of where we are in the procession in time. And it's kind of interesting the way he does it. There's periods of the book where it's kind of some of it is story and interesting, and some is a lot of map and cartography and kind of difficult to understand if that's not your forte. But what you were saying about the Mississippi made me think of that. Also, here in Austin, if you come to the roof of my building and you eat mushrooms, it looks like the Giza Plateau out there, out downtown. Because the roof of our building, we have the best view of downtown Austin. And it's weird, the way that the lights on the buildings are, and there's things that during the day, if you look at them, they do look like they are things that we see in Egypt. Some of them do. We have a lot of pyramid buildings here, but the way they sort of organize themselves with the lights, at night, from one angle you look and you think you're looking at the Giza Plateau, and then you can kind of move your head around, and it's it looks like the Champs-Elysees in France, and from another angle it looks like the Golden Gate Bridge going across San Francisco, and it's very weird. But Austin is AU. It's gold on the periodic table, right? So a very transmutable, very changeable, very flexible kind of metal and energy. And I also think I think that part of why there's so much focus on Austin and so many things and people and things are building here is because I think it's changeable, right? I think that there's almost on some level, whether it be actual or just sort of energetic or whatever.
So Austin's, Augustus, Georgia has that college town. So anything we could take with an AU at the beginning of it, these are going to be malleable towns that are going to kind of go with the flow throughout time.
Well, I think they also connect, I think they can be very many other things, right? I think there's a lot of embedded hidden symbology, you were talking about Anubis there in Florida. There's this famous building here in Austin called the Frost Building, and people think it looks like an owl, and there's a lot of Illuminati conspiracies about it. But if I were to show it to you from the angle from my apartment building, you realize that the building is actually Anubis, right? But everybody's running around, oh, it's the owl, it's the Moloch, it's this, that, or the other thing. There's all of these different things embedded within the city, and depending on the perspective and the consciousness with which you're approaching or looking at them, it seems like something different to you. It's a very sort of
you're marked with the X even in Texas,
right?
So you have the X right in the middle, which I think this is their big, if I were to Mark of a Beast play, I think it's an X. I think And I think Mexico, even their flag, when like Matt LaCroix does the whole eagle versus serpent battles throughout time and how we're supposed to be a serpent society, but we're under the impression that we're supposed to be an eagle society. Yeah. That when the Inca and the Mayans all got taken over throughout Mexico and when they all got murdered and all the smaller tribes and all like, because there's like Betapacha Indian and like there's tribes that have never been messed with even by the Inca or Mayans still that are have the ancient cultures all the way back. And so they even say that it was mocked when Mexico was taken over because the serpent no longer lives there and the eagle has it in its clutches, like chewing it. And so when you look out all the serpent worship that used to be in Mexico, or even what did Saint Patrick do? chased the serpents out of Ireland. Like we keep getting the serpent thing, but we're under the thing because we all get biblically trained that the serpent is bad. But I think it's an inversion of everything, and the serpent's supposed to be good.
There's I love when Roger from Mud Fossil University talks about like the mountain range that the Susquehanna River runs through is actually the carcass of Quetzalcoatl, right?
That stuff blows my mind.
Yeah, I love that shit, right?
Did you see the one of Maui? Did you see the one where it's Maui? And if you look at if you look at the island, it looks like a Nephilim or a big giant or something laying in the sea. And so you can see its head and its shoulder, and where the fires started on it, it was right in its crown chakra and right in its heart chakra.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. There is, so one thing that we figured out through all of our glass bead stuff is how many places there are in the world with the same name. And like, they're often like arranged in the same pattern. Like if you are looking at, it's like Michael and I at one point were looking at a place he had lived once in an area I lived. And there was some of the suburbs had the same name and they were arranged in the same pattern, right? And so like, I almost like wonder, like obviously there's evidence that the same people sort of built and arranged the grids, but this has to be for a reason. But I do think that there is connection between places with same name, right? And whether that connection is like literally that you can energetically move between those two things, or whether it is that like, some of the energy of that place that was the original one is also being harnessed or being sort of fomented.
Or it makes me like sister cities. Like we hear that like aunt sister cities. So there's a peak in Illinois and a peak in China. In Pekin, Illinois, it was named because they said if you stuck a needle through Pekin, Illinois, it would come out in the other side in Pekin, China. We also all grew up all the time with hearing like, oh, what are you doing? Digging to China? Right. Why? Every time any of us had a shovel in the ground, we were all digging to China. It seems weird that we would just say that unless somewhere underground there was something different than what we understand now. And so like in Pekin, it's so much proven so that now the high school in Pekin, Illinois is the Pekin Dragons. But if you look back a little bit further in history to the 50s and 60s, they were called the Pekin Chinks. So it's like, there's so much. I even think Japanese internment camps in our country weren't that at all. I think we had sit down military bases the same way America does. Every time we go anywhere, we put a base there. Yeah. So I just think there is something going on that we don't understand about our history at all. It doesn't matter what esoteric way that even this.
Certain locations are connected, and maybe it's
I think so too,
based on the concentration of specific elements in the ground.
Or your tone and my tone. What about if our families used to know that when those certain stars were at a certain point, your family that would come through with your Ruth energy and my family that would come through with my Nash energy, and we would do our tones together and it would open up a portal or a time
if there's
frame.
A famous person named Ruth Nash. Let's see if
I like that guy.
Ruth Nash. The first thing that pops up is Ruth Nash, First National Bank of Texas. Right. So it's like correlating the topics we've mentioned here in the conversation.
Here's another idea too, just for everything we all talk about. We are all basing all our research on the languages that were written in stone. Yeah. And I'm here to debate that I think the first languages were that of dance, were that of, I think we weren't whores. We were spies spreading information, and we wore it on our clothes and we wore it on our beads. They weren't just prayer beads. Color is language. Fabric is language. I could put a whole story on my dress and walk from one king to the other like a little red sparrow, and no one would be any of the wiser that I was going to be the one. You brought up the glass beads earlier. And I think that would have been a way that we would have spoke to each other way before we used our tools to etch in stone and give everyone our secrets. We would have spoke in ways we could break. We would have spoke in ways we could burn. We would have spoke in ways that could never be heard from again. We wouldn't have wrote everything in stone. That isn't, and it's not even the winners that write that history. It's really just whoever was the dipshit that could put a straight line in stone. I think we wrote fancy lines, and like even like if we wrote in sand, our letters would have attached. If we were carving something in stone, we would have had no curves. It would have just been straight. But if we were writing in string, we would have had curves all day. So I think there's something so backward, like almost like the most masculine, brutal form of our language has been the only language to make it through. But we've had other languages that existed that were way older than our tools wrote in stone.
I think so what's in the thing I was saying about glass bead is like Michael and I did a series, and now I've continued it with someone else that is based on Herman Hesse's book, The Glass Bead Game. So we did a series called Playing the Glass Bead Game, and our idea about what Herman Hesse was actually talking about, what he was implying with this title in these stories, has evolved over time. But what's funny is, like, where I'm from in Los Angeles, Chatsworth, is where most of the beads that people in the world use are manufactured, right? Like, I'm not talking about the artisan beads that tribes make, but like the simple little glass beads that everybody does their things with, they actually come from Chatsworth. And when I started to look into exactly what you're talking about, like when I started to pay attention to cave paintings, right? I started to notice that a lot of what was on the wall there seemed to be indicating frequency. And if you look at wampum belts and the Indian beaded jewelry and all the baskets and the pillows that they make, they're encoding frequencies. It looks like patterns that are like a frequency band, right? And that seems to me to be exactly what you're talking about. The women would figure out a way to make some piece of art or some piece of jewelry to pass along to someone to communicate, like, I don't know if this is like, this is where I'm from, or like, this is what's going on.
Even like long beat, short beat of Morse code. Yeah. So imagine long line, short line, long line, short line.
Yeah.
Like, are our heartbeats even speaking to each other, but we're so blind to the Morse code we might be sharing with each other all the time? So imagine if colors and bumps and even now take off what our eyes see. This is something that you said about blind earlier, which I think is something that the elite are messing with somehow. I just can't figure it out, that they do want to mess with blind children. And I don't know if it's because they can't brainwash them the same way with their sight, or because they don't have their two eyes working. Their third eye is even brighter, but there is something that from the beginning of time, they've always messed with them the same way they mess with schizophrenics, the same way they mess with like they have an impasse. They mess with blind kids over and over again. So I would even think one of the highest forms of language is Braille, and we haven't even discovered half the paintings that are really written on the walls of these caves yet, because no one's feeling it.
Yeah.
Think about how much caves wouldn't have had light. So if you would have just walked and put your hand on the wall of the cave and you spoke bumps in Braille, you would have been able to navigate anywhere in the dark.
Are you familiar with these kind of petroglyphs, the cupules?
Oh, this is so awesome.
So my friend Masaki told me about this, and he has like some friend that he knows that is an artist that makes stuff with these, right? And so like the most interesting ones are some combination of that and something that we think of as drawing or lines, right? But yeah, these are a different kind of petroglyphs. It's funny, Juan and I were talking about a lot of this last night. I did a show with Juan, and I almost, when he was explaining, we were talking about my mom and this code that we were talking about this particular code, and we were talking about her eyes. And I was almost going to say that it's almost like Braille or something, whatever he was describing to me. I can't remember exactly what he said, but that's what I was thinking the whole time the whole time, like Braille, right? So yeah, I think you're definitely onto something. And I think this art is interesting. And there's also like, wasn't there some of this?
Did your mom have freckles in her eyes or something?
No, were you say something? No, she didn't really. She didn't really. My mom had, glaucoma, but she also, like everyone else in my family, has poor vision and astigmatism. Both my parents, my sister, my mom. My mom had like glaucoma and all kinds of other weird things with her eyes. She was always had all these weird like eye drops she had to take to change the, what'd you say?
I'm reading this article, and a lot of words that you're saying are in this article about Ruth Cohen Nash.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so she found an article about a woman named Ruth Cohen Nash, and everything you and I are talking about are words that are in the article that she's reading about Ruth Cohen Nash.
Okay, just randomly see if there's a Ruth star in the constellation Sagittarius.
Look that one up. Okay, so So she was always like, she's had, some laser procedures and whatever, but it was mostly having to do with things related to the pressure in her eyes, right? So she was constantly having procedures done, and my dad does too, but my dad has diabetes. And so
do you deal with migraines ever?
every once in a while I get like a
Do you get pressure in your eyes when you're getting downloads?
Pressure in my eyes.
I get pressure in my eye when I'm getting downloads. This eye specifically.
I mean, my eyes sometimes will do some like weird, like vibrating and shit like that, right? My eyes change colors, right? Like my eyes are not the same color every day. I have the central heterochromia. I'm not 100% clear on like what my mom's actual eye conditions all were. But I think it very much had to do with her
There's a Nash in Sagittarius.
There is a Nash in Sagittarius.
That's the tip of the spear in Sagittarius. So I was like, if a roost star's in Sagittarius too, I'm going to be like, all right, because I think there's something with these constellations and the frequencies as well. Like the sun's gold, the moon's silver.
Find out where a Ruth star is.
And the constellations aren't the planets. This is another thing. Like, I feel like it's in the Bible that we shouldn't follow in the wandering stars. The wandering stars are the planet. That's why like the Rolling Stones and these kind of things, we're not supposed to follow those. We're only supposed to follow the constellations. And that's why I feel like somewhere the evil they, whatever you want to call them, they're making us put energy on these planets that is supposed to be in the constellations.
Yeah. Interesting.
Which is frequency as well. And they all represent metals. So I'm like, what's it all mean?
In that book, Inside the Earth by Radu Sinamar, he talks about how a planet is formed from an accretion disk in the same way that a god grows by people paying attention to it. Right. So I think he was equating the planets to gods, and that the more focus that's on them, the bigger that they get. Right. And yeah, like I think that is, I mean, I think they want us paying attention to planets or space or whatever, because there is either a being or a mineral deposit on the earth somewhere that is correlated with that. And when our attention is focused on that, it expands its power. Right. I get into this a lot of times, like Jeff and I used to always look at, when in the last probably 10 or 15 years, we get a lot of like acronym speak, right? Like they call her AOC, or like everything has an acronym for it. It's interesting to look up what other things have that same acronym, and if they are rising in popularity or falling in popularity or getting a charge out of that as well. And you will often find that when there's a lot of conversation about something or someone with an acronym, then the crypto that has that same acronym, or the stock that has that same acronym, or another business with that same acronym, they will also be experiencing like a rise. So I think that is like a coded way to transmit energy and currency as well. I like to always look, of course, at the tennis tour. The men's tennis tour is ATP, which is the energy production center in the body. Right. So I always, that's like one of my favorite ones. There's no star named Ruth.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That it would be a god and not a star.
There's a god, and it's a Russian goddess, or it's a goddess correlated with quote Russia or Ukraine or something. I remember when I was doing the Ruthenium research, like that came up. You said something earlier about the country Georgia, right? The country Georgia, I love, I've never been, but I would love to go to Georgia. Like I love looking at pictures. Like there's this river that flows through these rocks there that looks like the most amazing thing ever. And the Georgian National Ballet is like my favorite dancing to watch. Have you ever seen them?
No, my kin is Swedish, Royal Swedish Ballet. And I've learned so much about these Royal Ballet companies through her experience with it that I'm like, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's very, check out sometime, just go. I'm not going to show it here because I've shown it before, and I'm sure people who follow me are tired of seeing the Georgian dancers, but like, it's not like any ballet you've ever seen. Just Google the Georgian National Ballet sometime. You're like, holy shit, like what the fuck actually is that, right? Oh yeah, I mean, but I think you're right about the language being dance, right? Like that is a language. It's weird. Like you can look at videos. Like I looked at videos of Michael Jackson dancing when he was a little boy. And he was doing a style of dancing that didn't exist then. Like he does a style of dancing that is called house dancing that came along with house music, which came at the earliest in the 70s, but probably in the 80s. And there he is in the 60s, like doing house music dance combination patterns that supposedly didn't become a thing until that music existed later. And so I think it's a way of transmitting the same set of information. Like you hear a frequency and your body wants to do the same particular move, because a lot of that music that he was dancing to has some of the same sort of rhythmic patterns and tones to it that house music had later. And it's almost like his body can't not do that when he hears that sound, the same way you can't not dance like that when you hear specific kinds of house music. So I think it's a language that lasts across time, like you can't lose that.
I talk about weird pop culture stuff that sometimes, like in esoteric and symbolism and all the other stuff that we go on about, people are like, oh, Chaney with Britney again. Oh, Chaney with Madonna again. Oh, Chaney with Lady Gaga again. Chaney with Michael Jackson again. Like Michael is the first hill I ever kind of died on conspiratorially, because I think he was totally framed. And I don't understand how his death and murder or fake death isn't more looked upon, because there isn't a more valuable figure maybe on the planet to me than Michael Jackson. And I think muses are real. I think it's a very high magic to inspire people. Not everybody has it. And it is music is there to inspire. It doesn't matter whether the feeling is bad or good, whether the nostalgia is bad or good. It inspires every time you hear it. And so owning masters of muses would be a very high magic. And somewhere Michael Jackson was about to leave Sony. That's why his last album was called This Is It. He gave a speech where he pretty much says everything like Michael Jackson's the conspiracy theorist. Right. And he was about to leave Sony owning over 51% of their music catalog. Not just all of Michael Jackson, not just all the Beatles, not just Elvis, not just Justin Timberlake, not just Britney Spears, not just NSYNC, not just New Kids on, like Janet Jackson, not just, like name it. He was about to own it. And one song, if I could tell you that Dolly Parton will make more money in currency off the song I Will Always Love You than Whitney Houston or her family will ever see. Because the writer, the muse who creates the song, the writer of it is always going to get more currency than the singer of it. Right. So if you own the masters, then you own the muse's inspiration. And so Michael was about to be the most powerful thing on the whole planet. And now because they called him a child rapist and did all these things, and I could debate every single one of those things with anyone, they got to buy his shit from him for cents on the dollar. And cents on the dollar, all his tracks they got from his family for like $625 million. And there's no way to me that Britney Spears isn't worth more money than the Twin Towers. So Michael Jackson is worth more money than probably all of downtown Manhattan. Like, yeah.
I know. So Laura follows your Instagram very closely. Like,
I'm trying not to be.
She tries not to go on Instagram, but every once in a while I'll hear her snickering and giggling in the other room, and I know what she's doing. Right? She's on your Instagram, so I'm aware that like you have a sort of penchant for pop culture, and I have a lot more sympathy and like and love for some of these pop culture figures than a lot of our colleagues do, who think they're all in on it or part, whatever it is, right? Like I've been through that phase, and then like, I've gotten to the place where like, a lot of like people are people, and in every realm of society, there's good people, there's bad people, there's everything in between. There's things you do when you have certain sets of knowledge and things you do when you don't, and then what you do when you find that out. And, everybody's sort of in process. So Michael Jackson grew up he grew up in Indiana, but he lived all of his adult life in the same area of Los Angeles that I grew up in. And in fact, his the famous house in Hidden Hills is just on the other side of like the expanse of land that you can't go into in Chatsworth. My dad had a girlfriend someone he dated that was the dog trainer for Michael Jackson's family dog back in the 80s. So like I went to the home in Hidden Hills and whatnot, right? So it's like people that live in a house in the same area that you kind of live in. And there's this idea that these people are so far different and removed from us, right? And I just think that isn't true. I don't know what your thoughts or opinions are on, I see you post a lot of things about Britney. I don't know how you really feel about her, right? Like I, for many, many years was really into Madonna, right? And it's been difficult to watch all of this crazy stuff that she's looking like and doing and whatever.
I believe in magic. So I believe there's high witches or wizards, and there's people like, not everyone's MK Ultra. Some people make it through all of the programming and come out the other side, and then they get to be the handlers. Like, I think there's levels to it. I think some people, they're like moms and they let their kids go right with old men from young ages, and their kids are always in the system. I think other kids are given animals that they're made to love for 6 months, and then they're made to murder it, and it cuts off their empathy slowly to even relate to other humans. And so I think there's all levels of this shit. And Britney, a thing that sticks out to me the most is I don't know whether she's alive. I don't know whether she's dead. I don't know if Britney's a twin. I don't know how I get down on clones, only because the first clone they ever showed us was a sheep. And I'm like,
or was it a ewe or a lamb or an I am, right?
Well, what was the sheep's name too? Dolly. And I'm like, it's like Dolly's just another one of their blondes. It's like they always give us a token blonde, and whether it's Dolly or Lady Gaga or Madonna or Britney.
I like the way you say Lady Gaga.
I won't say her name, her high witch name, because she's not a high witch like Madonna. She's controlled by Marina Abramovich, in my opinion, and probably is Marina Abramovich's daughter.
She does look a lot like her. I agree.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I think Britney, a key thing that stuck out to me is that no one points out is that they took so much of her blood every week.
Right.
And when I did the interview with Thomas, Paranoid American, and he, because he's doing his book on adrenochrome, and his research on it, when people say it's not real or like, oh, it's just a conspiracy theory, you haven't done any research. You have no idea what you're talking about. And so the amount that they would have these insane asylums across the planet, and people with schizophrenia would have higher levels of adrenochrome in their body.
The best stuff. Yeah.
So if you see Britney and she's having an episode, or Beyonce and she's Sasha Fierce on stage, or Kanye and he's losing his mind, that might be the adrenochrome I want. I might want to feel that energy of what Sasha Fierce feels. I might want to feel the energy of Britney spinning, Britney spinning, Britney spinning, this forever altar of a child that they've kept her at. And I always tell people to look at Anna Nicole Smith and kind of what happened to her over the longevity of her life. But you can attach, like people are like, oh, she was a gold digger. No, she married a billionaire to protect her from Peter Nygaard, another billionaire. Like Peter Nygaard, if you look into everything about this dark cat, I would put him up there with, like, he's over Epstein with darkness. Like all the same things are happening with a whole bunch of the elite people. I just think Epstein's the one fall guy that they're like, Brink Wall cut him off like he's Weinstein, just the same way as Harvey Weinstein. We won't talk about a pedophilia in Hollywood if we all Me Too movement. Let's all pay attention to Rose McGowan and Asia Argenta instead of talking about this other stuff.
It's the same thing with Larry Nassar and the gymnastics. Like there's tons of pedophile gymnastics coaches, but they just like, if we get rid of him, then we can stop the conversation and we can get back to business as usual and whatever it is. What you just said. So I did a show with Thomas where we did talk a lot about that. And I did listen to your guys' conversation about adrenochrome before we did that show. And the connection between Scottish Rite Freemasonry and schizophrenia and their desire to really understand it. And basically it seems like they had people who, with the bloodlines that tended to become Masons, had a high tendency for Alzheimer's or a dementia precox, and that they were trying to get homeopathic doses of this. Like they basically wanted, it was almost, this is what it felt like, is that almost like if they could take expose themselves to small doses of the schizophrenia through the adrenochrome or whatever, then that would prevent the later onslaught of that Alzheimer's or dementia, right?
But almost like they could have been spreading Alzheimer's or dementia just so they could study this. Because that's what I always feel like they're doing weird stuff to us on one end. So they can say on the other end, like, oh, look at all these 500,000 people we studied on the polio vaccine. And then we stopped giving the polio vaccine and look at the numbers went down.
So we got into this conversation because like my mom's father was a member of the Schizophrenia International Research Society. And I do think that was something that went on with my mom, is that she had some sort of low level compartmentalized schizophrenia her whole life that they were sort of managing. I don't know if they were creating it, if it was literally something that they created, like they dosed her with it and created it to study it, or if it was something she had and they were trying to manage it and control it. But I think that it's kind of like, have you heard
think it's junk DNA. I think what they call junk DNA is our magic DNA. Yeah. And I think they somewhere, if they would let kids be and fed them okay stuff and whatever, that junk DNA would turn on and become magical powers.
Yes.
But instead they spend the time from elementary. They want even kids indoctrinated earlier and earlier. So they indoctrinate the moms, they put them in school when they're 5. But I think all that stuff slowly makes what would have been their magical power, their weakness. And so society, since you and me have been alive, we watched all from bipolar and manic depressive, and what once was Asperger's is now a whole spectrum of mental disorders. And now let's say the word spectrum over and over and over again. So you forget gay and mental disorder and all your fucking trans agenda and transhumanist. It all just becomes one fucking rainbow. And I just think like somewhere they're labeling stuff. I think all medicine, pretty much Western medicine. It's not just dentistry and it's not just big pharma, and it's also big friggin' psychiatry and all that stuff is so weird. Like it is so next level. Like they mess around with hypnotism. They mess around with implanting ideas. They mess around with SSRIs. Look at every single one of these friggin' shooters is all on these things. Why aren't we interviewing shrink after shrink after shrink in all of these things? So and even the name shrink.
Right.
We used to lobotomize people, then we electroshock therapy, then we shrink them. What? Like even the words of this. So I almost think these people that we called mentally disordered might have been the people that led the old world.
I 100% agree. Chad and I have talked about how like the sanitariums were in these locations where the important ley lines were, because you wanted to put all these people there because they could see the Pythagorean palace and describe it to you. And you're sitting there taking notes, you're their psychiatrist, and it's like they think you're just taking notes about how crazy they are, but really you're taking notes on the coordinates that are mapping out the hyperspace realm all around you, and they're using that to their benefit and locking you away in the room right here. Right. No, I think that's it. That's 100%. Like I think
the military did tests on people too. And like all through it. And then that's why when we keep talking about, look at our homeless population, all of our vets, they did that, all the crazy veterans, that isn't because like, oh, that guy's shell shocked. Oh, that guy has PTSD. Oh, that guy they all had experiments ran on them. I now think war is just an experiment where they take this group and they make them run up a hill and make this group shoot at them and make this group take this vaccine and make this group do. I don't even know. Like, I just think it's all test studies to see what level of human fear they can push us to. Like we're Yulin Dog Fest.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of experimenting and creating and all kinds of things going on. I do think that you've probably heard that there's a study going on at the Imperial College of London, which I don't know why anybody would want to put the people who brought us the 2 weeks to flatten the curve hoax in charge of the hyperdimensional DMT realm, but that seems to be what they're doing. They're conducting a study at mapping out the hyperspace dimensions of DMT. So they're giving people drip DMT over a long period of time so they can stay in that space and start to describe it. So they're mapping out hyperspace, basically, right, in this controlled fashion. But I think that has always been part of what's been going on with the people that with schizophrenics and sort of like controlling them and medicating them, but then also like observing them when they go off their medication or giving them something else, is I think that they want to know about the extra.
Tell me who's talking to you. Tell me what they're saying. They want to know this shit.
They want to know
what
what
else,
else,
crazy and make you go back into the room.
They want to know what else is there, and they want to be able to control it. They want to be able to make the access happen when they want it to, but not have it happening when they don't want it to. Right. So this is part of like the compartmentalization of like personalities with dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder, or whatever, like all of this crazy stuff. I think I agree with you. Like all of these things we would call sort of extended states or irregular states or whatever, that is just when this person is sort of accessing all of the other variations around us that aren't part of our everyday.
If we were in a village back when and they were having one of those manic episodes, like Carrie from Homeland, I always picture when she has a lot of pictures on the wall and threads attached all to them and she's having her manic download episode. If somebody was in a village 1,000 years ago and they were having that from whatever above, we would keep them safe and we would separate them and we would keep them warm and we'd keep them fed and we'd let them be. We'd keep everyone away from them. We'd let them sit in their thing. We'd give them the music they wanted and we'd all realize this person was getting a download. We wouldn't be like, this person's crazy.
Well, and then also afterwards, we'd listen to all the things that they had to say. And then we'd go study, we'd research, like where was the person standing when this happened? What else is there? Like, like I said, what's in the ground there? What is the pathway that like the sun or the star or something like that was shining at the moment that happened? Like, if we're in modern society, let's take measurements. Let's see what the radiation level is there. Right? Like the people would start so many times, like, if you go to places where some people say they saw a ghost or someone said they were abducted by an alien or someone says there's a vortex or whatever, there's a noticeable reading on a meter that something is going on there. Like you might go into a building and you might be like, this is creepy. I think there's an entity here, but I might just be like, it smells funny. But the same thing that's creating both things is sulfur. It's a gas that has like its own set of like realm or spirits or whatever, and also has an odor. And some people are sensitive to it in one way and some are sensitive to it in another way. But I think it's basically, we just have different machinery that is either decoding or projecting onto these surroundings in different ways based on what we're made of and what happens when we meet the environment around us. And rather than saying like, this is crazy and this is right, or you're doing it wrong, or I'm smarter than you or whatever, it's actually just like different ways of perceiving or understanding the same set of circumstances, but the way you meet it is different depending on who you are, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a very narrow band of what's an acceptable way to understand reality, and everything outside of that is either crazy or conspiracy theorist or stupid or whatever it is. And I think that it's, like that's the true, they want us to think that like the rainbow or the spectrum is just a range of diseases or sexualities or whatever it is. But it's truthfully, like in the organic sense, all of these different layers or levels of reality that can be accessed and learned about and tapped into. And for some people experienced, and for others, like I might not even be able to go to like the same room that your code opens the door to, and you might not be able to go to mine, but we certainly can tell each other about them. And there's probably some similarities and some differences, and that's part of what makes everyone different in this world.
We're learning on certain drugs that people are meeting the same entities, and it's not because they're talking to each other or learning about it ahead of time. They're like, no, I never read about this thing. I went and I did a DMT trip and I saw this thing. I looked it up online and all these other people had seen it too. Yeah. And so it's like, if they want to map realms, there's proof to other realms. You can like see there, all these documents, when people think all this stuff is conspiracy, like the military studies all this stuff. They study it because they know it to be true. And so it's like when people are like, oh, this is just crazy talk, like, no. And I mean, crazy is like, I think schizophrenia and adrenochrome is one substance. I think melanin is a very important other substance to them. And I think the third substance that needs to be talked about more is there's something with virgin's blood that is the third substance. Interesting. That is important to them.
The melanin thing is interesting. I have this book over here called Dark Light Consciousness that's been on my pile for a bit. I learned about prismatic melanin from Kalindi, who's like well, he's gone, but he's one of my favorite people to listen to, Kalindi EE. And I heard this term from him, prismatic melanin, and I started sort of looking it up. And it's basically, like certain people decode the information coming from the light and the sun and all the things around us completely differently, dependent on the type of and levels of melanin in their skin. And that, I mean, he was saying it in relationship to Black people or people from Africa having more of this prismatic melanin. But during the same period of time that I learned about this, that was a year I spent like a ton of time exercising outside, and my level of downloads and my like outside the box thinking and unusual sort of ideas and whatever were dramatically increased during this period of time. And I ever since then, I know that like the more time I spend out in the sun, right, moving around, doing things and just being in that, and the darker I get, like the more complex my thinking and my understanding of reality gets.
I feel like I can't even, I just have to be out in the sun all the time. I just feel better if I'm in the sun all the time.
Yeah.
I just like it.
The virgin's blood is that I hadn't like thought about that one in terms of like being in the same way with the adrenochrome or the melanin or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think there's untarnished information there, right? Like I think
it's unmixed. It's DNA only precisely from your parents at the time you were born. I feel like all sexual things we do and all like impure in other ways. I think we change DNA with people in so many different ways. Yeah. And so I think the idea of virgin's blood and like I just think that sex magic with DNA exchange, it does something different to the entire blood of somebody.
It's an information swap. It's kind of like sharing files on your computer, right? And now like you have something on your computer that wasn't there before, that you can access, that you can listen to, that you can open, that you can change. And also if there was a virus or a worm, then that's there too now and whatnot. And
or what about if I could communicate with it? Like, what about if the astral travel idea is almost to 6 degrees of separation and a virgin's blood is untouched? So nobody can get to that oracle. Like if I were to make this thing the oracle of Delphi, it would be so much more powerful than that tainted thing, because all those other DNAs and witches and wizards and magical beings and priests and politicians could attach to that thing. But this thing is pure.
Yeah.
Because even the idea of virgin, for like the word virgin, like for so many things, and I think rarity wise as well, the rarer the thing, the more valuable it is. So it's like somewhere, if there is a very green-eyed, red-headed, black
child,
boy, like right now on the planet, it would probably be a black boy virgin that would be of high value energetically.
Yeah, no, I mean, I it's just completely uncorrupted, condensed information about hundreds, thousands, millions of years of history. And we don't even understand how this works. So probably things going forward as well. Like it probably runs in multiple.
Oh my gosh, redheads. You can't even put them to sleep the same. Like an anesthesiologist needs a different level of all the medications to put a redhead to sleep.
Really?
Like a true redhead. They're the second biggest minority on the planet after red eyes or green eyes. And redheads they exist in every culture and color around the planet. So it's not just an Irish or a Nordic thing to have red hair.
Oh, there's Black people with red hair.
So it's like even that idea of like, you're saying like Alzheimer's, for example, if your mom was seeing things, did I freeze? Can you hear me?
You freeze, but we can still hear you.
Okay. If your mom was seeing things that I might have to restart my video, but if my mic's still here, then I'll do it in 1 second. That if you're seeing things into a realm, then redheads, if they can't get put to sleep the same, it's because they're supposed to have conversation from that realm, maybe.
Interesting.
Okay.
I haven't heard that before, but Laura and I were just talking the other day about like, redheads are distinctly different, right? Some people really like them, some don't, but everyone I think would agree that redheads are distinctly different than other people. And so that's an interesting, I wasn't aware of that
I might have to restart my computer real quick. Is that okay? Or not my computer, but restart the app real quick.
Sure.
Okay, I'll be right back.
I'll come back in, sure. Well, we're on YouTube live streaming, so I'm just gonna chatter here for a second in the live stream on YouTube.
Okay, then you have to look at this.
Well, I'm still running on the video, so I can't come over and look at that. And there's a huge amount of commentary in the chat room. Hi, chat room. Sorry, I have ignored, but I'm not one of those people who's good at doing the show and paying attention to the chat room at the same time. We're going to be wrapping up shortly when she comes back because I'm super hungry. Okay, cool. I will. Oh, she's from Salt Lake City, Utah. Who was just talking about that?
I know she lived in San Antonio, Texas.
Okay, so I'll bring that back. I'll bring that up when she comes back.
Guided Harper's Ferry. Harpy.
Okay.
I was talking about harpies.
Okay, so we will bring that up when she comes back. But if people have any, yes, we will come back to the conversation as soon as she gets back. If you guys have any questions or comments that for us that you want us to get to before we wrap it up, do it in all caps. That way it's easier for me to notice because I'm not good at paying attention to this while I also talk. And let's see. All right, let me see if she's back. Let's go back to the Zoom room. She's not back quite yet. If anybody has any question or commentary that they want to chatter with me while we wait for her to come back. Hi, Sunny. Sunny said hi to you too as well, Laura. Hi, everybody.
I didn't know this was live stream.
Yeah, we're live streaming. We are live streaming. Hi, Nigel. I saw you sent some more messages. I haven't had a chance to look at them. I had kind of a busy day and then I just crashed out in the middle of the day for like an unexpected few-hour nap. So I just woke up a little bit before the show.
They're saying hi to me. I'm saying hi back. I probably look terrible, but whatever.
She's come. Here she is. Chaney's back. Chaney is back. All right.
Okay.
Okay, there you
That
are.
was so weird.
So back to the redhead. People were like, don't lose track of the conversation because it was interesting, right? I was chatting with the chat room while you were gone. So
perfect.
Back to the redheads, and then Laura has brought over the Wikipedia on this Ruth Cowan Nash person, which is actually kind of interesting. So we will we'll hit that, and then we'll start to wrap it up because I'm hungry. I haven't had dinner yet. Okay, so redheads, like whatever you think of them, they are distinctly different, but that is interesting that they require, is it more medication, less medication, or different? More medication.
More, yeah. And if you look at Mary Magdalene, she was said to be a redhead. A lot of people say Mary Magdalene was she went to the ISIS school and she was a big witch, and even her name says so, Mary Magdalene. But a lot of the giants that people look up, redheads. Yep. Genghis Khan, a redhead. That you even look up the true, if there is some kind of magical thing to like the throne of England. The Germans that we see sit there now as the House of Windsor aren't the true throne, but the Churchill Spencers would have been, and Diana's bloodline, redheads. King Arthur is said to be a redhead. So it's just like, it's interesting how you can look all through all different cultures and there's this big redhead thing. They even said like over in like Texas, I think Arizona, and that they found like redhead giants over in that area.
I think they found some buried in Catalina Island in California. Like I've heard that story before. My sister's husband, he's Black, and his family, the women, there are some women in his family with red hair, right? And they're like an interesting family. Like his mother started the first Black adoption agency in the United States, right? In Detroit. And like he grew up on the same street that like the Fords had their mansion on and stuff like that. But when you look into some of that narrative, Tartarian, old world children and whatever, this has to do with orphans and adoption and all of this kind of stuff. I mean, they're super lovely people, but they're actually from Texas. They're from Mahia, Texas, which is the same place that Anna Nicole Smith is from, right? But they were amongst the first like Black landowners in Texas, and like they have a very interesting, very specific history. So a
lot of the orphan trains, and I think just as much as they would have done that at one time in a great reset, they would have taken the orphan trains and mixed people all up, just because if we forgot let's say if we forgot our elements, so we didn't know anymore what our family was powerful in, what we were drawn to, what we were supposed to do. And they took, let's say I was originally and my bloodline's supposed to be in, Brazil, and I'm supposed to know everything about a banana tree. And I'm really, now my bloodline's in Maryland and I know everything about a cedar, just like little things like that if they took it away from us. So I think a way that we would have combated it, because I always try to think if that's what like one side did to battle us, then we would have combated it we would have started taking the surnames of men, because the womb would have been the important part. That would have been to me, the Guinevere, the sword and the stone really would have been our wombs, because we would have had to keep them safe. And it was a virgin womb that was untouched. We would have had to keep that safe. So a way that we could bury it, let's say if our bloodline was being hunted, would be if our kin of kin now were so many last names away from our family's real last name. So I think surnames, instead of thinking them as like a masculine way that they own us, I think it would have been a way that men and women both decided that we'd hide our children. I don't think I don't think that was a patriarchal thing as much of a protection thing. Like, let's protect our bloodlines from the king. So we'll just start taking the surnames of the men.
Yeah, no, that certainly is a possibility. I suspect that with the orphan trains, or even like, I don't even know what to think about what it was or wasn't going on in Maui or whatever, but to the extent that there's a large amount of missing children, I think that particularly if there's long bloodlines indigenous to a specific piece of land, if they resonate with the elements there, right, that they sort of have this like magical pass to the hyperdimensional realms that exist on that location, right? And you want to take over that location and figure out access to that technologically, and you don't want any of these pain in the ass little children there doing your thing, or to the extent that you need them for access to that, you want to control that access. That is completely what I think about a lot of these cases with child trafficking and all this kind of stuff. Like, not that there aren't a few special sick people out there, but that it's really about like moving a person with a certain resonance or energy field from one place to the other, because you want access to their juju, to their magic. You want to be able to either know about the realms they have access to, or if possible, have access to them yourself, and you can't do it on your own. Right.
Well, we think like an elite would collect tigers or pandas or a boa constrictor or a tiger fish. Like, look at all the weird stuff we have all over our planet that isn't supposed to be there because some rich person needed that thing.
Right.
They won't do that to people.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I always go back to 300, like Xerxes, whatever the god's name is. Sometimes I think like in his tent, we see a bull man, like centaurs and minotaurs and guys with pinchers as arms. And even back to Michael Jackson, like an elephant man,
right? Like
he had the elephant man skull. I think sometimes that whatever happened in Egypt, what they blew the face, like, let's say ancient Kemet was really awesome. And like, let's say this very Atlantean type place. I think when it got taken over, it would have been when they started to futz around maybe with playing God and mixing species. And so we would have gotten all these crazy things, and they would have blown the face off the Sphinx or changed the Sphinx altogether to make it man and animal. Yeah. And then we see all the man animal representations come up with all the Greek gods and all the India gods too. We don't, because they put Shiva outside of CERN, and we're not supposed to be asking more questions about that shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of Kalindi's talks about ancient Kemet are really, have you ever listened to Kalindi?
No.
Oh yeah. So this is like, he's an African, he taught African martial arts, and he did 50-gram doses of mushrooms at a time and like complete interdimensional travel, but he's a great storyteller too. So the way he sort of unravels his stories about traveling to these realms is super interesting. But the way he describes the technology of the art from ancient Kemet and the way it works with mushrooms, I love listening to him talk about that. But yeah, he talks about some of that scenery. that
like, yeah, it just makes me, or I mean, it's just so many what ifs. I just feel like the more I research, really, the more I realize I don't know. And it's
like the Benjamin Button of understanding things.
Yeah. And everyone's like, stop worrying about that stuff. It doesn't give me anxiety not to know anymore. Like I don't have any fear about looking into the world anymore about what I don't know. It like turns me on in this very great way. Like my calling is called toward whatever that is. And I know like a lot of people are just like, oh, well, that's a waste of time, or this is a waste of time, or that's whatever you feel like you're calling it. Like, I feel like so many of us, even in this realm, we like to tell each other what dead ends are, or, you're doing the wrong thing, or this is the way I do it, or my people, because wherever my last name is, I think that's where the beginning is. Like, that's what I realized too. We all think whatever our people are from, we're the chosen ones. While we all argue about everybody else wanting to be the chosen ones, we think, no, they're not the chosen one, I'm the chosen one. That's really like the argument all the time, of this confirmation bias of our own bloodlines. When now I'm just like, I don't really know. The more I look, the more I don't know.
The more confused I become.
It doesn't make me anxious. I love it. I love sitting with adults again and being like in our 10-year-old selves, and all being like, we're all looking. Sometimes I feel like I know. Most of the time I know I don't know, but I like sitting with you guys and feeling like you don't know either, but you have all these other things that I'm like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about it with that filter yet.
I love it. I love trying on someone else's glasses to see what it looks like, right? To see what, like, I love that, like seeing what the world looks like through their eyes. Like, can I suspend my disbelief and my sort of obsession with my own nonsense long enough to like try on their filter, to try on their glasses or whatever it is? And yeah, I agree with you. It's the best. You mentioned, I want to ask you one thing, tell you this, and then we'll start to wrap it up. You mentioned briefly Dolly Parton, and you had a certain sparkle on your face when you said it. I have become quite obsessed with Dolly Parton. Like, I think she's like, I think she's pretty high up there, dude. Right? Like,
she has a whole Dollywood.
No, I know. I know she has a whole Dollywood, but like, I pretty much like, she's a seriously powerful person. Like, I ended up doing several shows about her earlier this year because I mean, I liked her when I was a kid because she was in 9 to 5. That was like one of my favorite movies. And I thought that was fun. And then, but I ended up watching a documentary about her on Netflix that totally gave me a complete different perspective on her than I'd had before, that made a lot of things that other people had told me in the past. Like my cousin Marky, who was an actress, once told me that Dolly Parton was like her favorite person in the world and the person that she looked up to. And I thought that was like sweet, but kind of a funny answer. Yeah. And then after I watched this and I started digging into Dolly Parton, I'm like, oh, now I understand what she was talking about. But that is a one smart bitch. That is like,
I think Dolly is high witch.
High witch. Like high that, like one witch. Of the highest.
She has monarchs at her. That's like her like emblem of Dollywood is a bunch of monarch butterflies. And so I would say that Dolly might be the first, and this will be like, this is like a rabbit hole. I think Dolly's the first walk-in for us into the trans agenda.
A lot of people say that. Like, a lot of people say that Dolly is really a man and she's got like all these tattoos and she's like a little short man and she's been playing the part. She's like I always say she has her Dolly part on, right? Like she's got her
Dolly, like
right. So she,
Wally.
I think that she is a master at this game, whether she is being controlled or the controller. She figured it out. And she figured out how to create distance between her personal life and her professional life in a way that allows her to be Dolly Parton when everybody expects her to be, and walk around as a somewhat normal person. So she has it. I think this is part of why she's able to write so many very good songs, because she's still able to take her Dolly part off and go experience the world as normal people do. And so it has a different, once you become famous,
is like a weird crossover too between, she has this Elvis energy to me mixed with Pam Anderson. So she is, and that Pam Anderson is just as powerful,
very powerful,
that we watch walk in us into the trans agenda, because these big fake tits are this Barbie that they give us, the doll the Barbie, this is the blonde that they all have to play up to. So
Right.
Dolly, just the same way as Maryland, just the same way as Brittany, just the same way as Pam, they're
Right.
the blonde of the generation, just the same way as Anna Nicole. Like every president gets a blonde to
Right.
take the thing off them when the thing's hot. So Brittany's president is Bush Jr. So it's just Pam Anderson's was Bush Sr. But you can go all the way back.
Have you watched the documentary on Netflix about her?
Yes.
It's very good. It's really good.
Some parts of it I question at the beginning of her. Like watching these documentaries, I don't watch them thinking they're telling me the truth.
No,
I think they're
no,
telling,
not at all.
yeah. But
Yeah.
it's like hearing these little details about their life, hearing these people in and out, even like hearing about Pam Anderson's father. And then you're
Right.
like, oh, well,
Pam
now
Anderson documentary was good too. We watched that
it
one.
was, yeah, that's right. The Pam and Dolly. Like, I'm just like, that's what, and Brittany. That's what I think Netflix.
We watched the Brittany, we watched Dan and Nicole. If you can sort of like, if it's kind of like Wikipedia, if you can understand the code as opposed to thinking it's telling you the truth, but if you can read between the lines, there's a ton of like really good information to be gleaned. I think Dolly Parton is incredibly powerful. I think most people who think of Dolly Parton as a country singer don't understand that half the songs they have ever liked in their entire life.
All parts on. That's so great, dude.
Right. And there doesn't Courtney Love sing a song that's called I Am Doll Parts. Right. Yes. Yeah. So I think she's referring to that there as well. She's another one of those.
She's a blonde. She totally is one of these blondes.
One of these types. Her father was completely an MK Ultra.
I think 2 psychiatrists were her parents.
Yeah. Yeah. But like the amount of music that has framed our reality that she has had a hand in. Right. And it's funny when she calls them little songs, like she likes to write these little songs or these little tunes. And like, I love listening to her play the 9 to 5 on her fingernails and shit. But her music is so catchy. It's all earworm. It's all stuff that like really gets inside of you, whether you know that it's a Dolly Parton song or not. Like when you hear some of those little like rhythms and rhymes, I mean, and we talked about the Whitney Houston song, but I mean, just I'm sorry, I started following her on YouTube, right? And I love her posts, but like she had this post yesterday about how much she likes writing songs with Linda Perry, right? Linda Perry is from Four Non Blondes, who used to write for Christina Aguilera and Pink and all of these other stuff.
But she wrote that, so you're the beautiful Christina Aguilera, like so many songs that people, this is why the muses, Linda Perry's a muse. So all the singers can't muse. Right. Linda Perry's making more money than Christina Aguilera.
So this is the weirdest thing I saw though. So Dolly Parton is like, I always love writing music with Linda Perry. I'm super excited about the release of my new rock song, What's Up? What's Up was like the most famous Four Non Blonde song.
Yeah.
Like, are we rewriting history? Did she actually write that song? Like,
oh my gosh, dude.
Remaking this? Like, what the fuck is going on here? Right.
Literally, that's what the song's called. What's up in what's going on?
Right. Yeah. Right. So, all right. Let me tell you a little bit about Ruth Cohen Nash here, and then we'll wrap it. Ruth Cohen Nash, born June 15th, 1901, died February 5th, 1993. That's my dad's birthday. Was the first woman war correspondent. She is famous for her coverage of World War II, during which she followed the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps and reported on major battles for the Associated Press. She was born in Salt Lake City.
Weird.
She died in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. We were talking about the harp and the harpies and stuff earlier.
I have to tell you too, all this week I've been watching it's on Netflix. It's an old show, but Band of Brothers. So it's World War II. All week I've been watching this show.
All right, you ready for this? She went to the University of Texas at Austin. Right? So she was born in and you're going to love this next line. She was born in Salt Lake City, the only child with parents William Henry and Ida Baldwin Cohen. Her father was a mining prospector, right? So working with the elements, digging for the shit in the ground, who died in 1911, at which point Cohen's mother, Ida, bought a homestead in Florida. Right? They were required by the government to live on the property in order to retain their homestead status. So you have to make sure a specific person is on this plot of land, right? And they lived there for about 2 years trying to raise grapefruits and orange trees. At the end of that time, Nash and her mother returned to Salt Lake City, where where Nash attended St. Mary's Academy, a convent school, despite the fact that Nash's family was not Catholic. Ida Cohen had previously been a teacher and felt that private schools provided a better education, so Nash went there. All right, so at a certain point, they sold their homestead and moved to San Antonio, Texas. I'm just seeing if there's anything else really interesting there.
It's like a Mad Libs.
Like a Mad Libs, completely. And it goes into things about her journalism career, right? She interviewed Franklin D. Roosevelt at the Democratic National Convention in Houston, Texas. Right. She was her initial journalist assignment was in Chicago, where she covered Al Capone's trial.
I think Al Capone, a weird thing about him is that after he died, I think Hillary Clinton's dad took over all of his shit.
Oh, interesting. That's not surprising. That's like
out of Illinois. Didn't we talk about Illinois?
Yeah. And then here it says she became she covered the Pentagon and the House Armed Services Committee. Let's see. Yeah.
She went to a boarding school in Cincinnati, Ohio. Usually Academy. It's a Catholic school.
Yeah, that's
went back and lived with her mother.
Interesting. She died when she was 91. Her papers are at Harvard. But anyway, it's just interesting that we put those names together and came up with a bunch of locations and topics that we talked about.
I'm writing it down. And Ruth Cohen Nash. And just for it's RCN. So now we just put that on the timeline for who knows what.
There we go. And Cohen is COWAN, not the Jewish, not the COHEN. Yeah.
See, I spelled it the other way.
So, okay. So last question before we wrap it up. Like, do you feel like the same person? Do you feel like a different person? Like, what is like you went on this, it seems like it's been a lot longer than it actually was, but like all of this really happened during the first 3 quarters of this year. Like, are you the same Chaney? Are you a different Chaney? Like, what's the sort of, I mean, I understand you're still on the path, but like, what's the takeaway right now for you? Sort of from
like
this experience.
I give a fuck so much less. Like I have so much less give a fucks. I love harder. I say what I mean easier. And like, I say my honesty to people, even if it's awkward as fuck.
Yep.
Like I am only spending time with energy that feels great to me. I'm not doing it anymore. I don't care the relation or longevity or like, I feel like we all got into this Facebook world where we have this weird brainwashing that we have to be fucking friends with a person that sat behind us in the 5th grade forever. No, keep in touch with the people you want to keep in touch with. Like, spend time with the energies you want to be around. Like, feel good. You're allowed to feel good all the time. And sometimes, like, the tears, what's the hard stuff? Because sometimes just telling people, like, when I got choked up about my brother, it's the amount I love him. That's what choked me up. The amount I felt safe with him, that choked me up. That's the stuff sometimes we run away from. Like, I don't tell some of my best friends that how much I love them because I'll get choked up when I say it. And that's the stuff that I feel like where I always call tears salt alchemy. And I feel like they're the most powerful ingredient in any spell. Because salt is a protection. So when they take it with a grain of salt. So sometimes you laugh until you cry, and sometimes you cry until you laugh. And both the things happen, and they both produce salt out of your eyes. It's like you're either mourning something that you really loved, or you're laughing about something so hard that kind of makes no sense if you were to try to explain it. Usually the stuff that makes you laugh till you cry, you really have to be there for. And so it's like this magic that happens, and it's so real. And so I feel like I'm not scared of tears at all anymore. And
well, that's beautiful. You seem so, every time that I've gotten to interact with you while this was going on since then, you seem like truly just genuinely happy and glad to be here. I'm glad that you're here. I knew something was going on with you. I was worried. And then when I heard what it was, I was sad that it had happened, but glad that you were here. And I'm super happy to know you and that you were able to come chat with me tonight. I'm hoping that you will pick some of your favorite elements on the periodic table and join us. I'm doing like this the project that will be the never ending thing on all the elements of the periodic table. But you were really the person that inspired some of that. So
Silver is my most favorite.
What is?
Silver.
Silver. Okay. Well, definitely you can come for silver, but if there's others you like to, then feel free to let me know and you can join us anytime.
Geek out on it. You just open a whole new rabbit hole. I'm like the periodic table. Sometimes I put the numbers in when I'm doing things, but so rarely it comes up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, even at the pH.
We're calling it elementary school, right?
Yeah,
we're calling it elementary
that's
school.
Perfect. That's brilliant.
And we have one teacher. It's going to be mostly like self-study for my friend Chris Miner and I. This is like the new iteration of the glass bead game is elementary school. We're mostly going to teach ourselves and do our own little research, but every time we switch to another group of elements, like another group, then Professor Balderson will join us and do a recap on the things we've learned, because he's doing a deeper dive on them as well on his own, but he's kind of our resident alchemist to sort of help us understand. And we're going to be inviting some of our friends to come and join us for specific elements, and we'll just see where it all goes, but also tell people what you're about to sort of launch and get going, and where people can start to tune back in to Project Chaney.
I have been slack on everything, but I've been getting better. It really healing. I am going to be I want people to go over to YouTube and subscribe starting this Friday at midnight. And I'm going to be doing it every Friday. It will be like a panel show, and it'll be called The Secret Society of Good Guys. And I'm going to have brilliant people on, some regulars and some rotating guests. And we're going to talk about really kind of like this convo. It could kind of go anywhere. I want to have some kind of structure to it every week. And, I'm looking forward to kind of captaining a ship and sitting back a little more and let other people entertain me. No, I'm just kidding. But I just want to be in the room while these great conversations happen. And I hope everybody wants to come hang out if we're all sitting at home like adults and not going out anymore. Let's hang out on Friday nights at midnight on Project Chaney, so they can find me at Project Chaney on YouTube or projectchaney.com anywhere. And if they want my ship posting account, they can go to Chaney_in_Wonderland on Instagram. And
is it Chaney in Wonderland, or is it Chaney the Vampire Slayer? Or is it both?
I think it's both on there. I think I think it's both. I think.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
you might be right.
It used to be Chaney in Wonderland, but I feel like now does it sometimes say Chaney the Vampire Slayer? Whatever it is, but it's at Chaney in Wonderland. So yeah, it's a good laugh. Laura certainly enjoys it.
And sometimes I really put in. Sometimes it's just for me. I just need a timestamp on something because I'm partially through a dig and I need to go back and find it through hashtags later on. Sometimes it's stuff I've really researched. So it's just a symbol and might be boring to everyone. A lot of the times it's like Church of Hollywood. That's what I hashtag it. Hashtag Church of Hollywood. You can't find it for any of the accounts they've stolen. But one thing I will say, if people want to follow that account, Instagram will warn you so many times you think you're unpacking a bomb. Are you sure you want to do this? This person has posted stuff that goes against community guidelines. This person is racist, sexist,
Nazi, fascist, homophobe, all that, right?
It'll
Laura
go through
wants
all
you to know
things.
that she has a girl crush on you. All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Chaney, thank you so much. And I look forward to chatting with you more often and again soon. And thank you to everyone who hung with us for almost 3 hours here.